Chapter 74. Acid Fog Canyon, Bartholomew's Mercenary Fortress. Keyes looked at the dissected demon body on the dissection table and fell into deep thought. One of the benefits of being a young blue dragon was that he was much bolder. Keyes would have been scared out of his wits if he was still the programmer he used to be, let alone being able to do the research himself. After the continuous battles with the Thanner Re demons, Ogre Shaman Palu had more research materials in his hands. Although the demons in the lower realm were all spirit and body as one, most of the time, when they were destroyed, their bodies would immediately rot and die. But as if to prove the chaotic nature of the bottomless abyss, there would always be some exceptions, especially when the bloody battle broke out and thousands of demons died in the battle. This situation was not uncommon. Ogre Palu, who always had potions, was not as smart as Brew, nor as strong as Brew, but compared to his two brothers, he was calmer and more dependable. Not only had he fully inherited the voodoo techniques from the trolls, but he had also developed them through continuous study. Thanks to the system's knowledge of demon anatomy obtained in Avernus, the demons had done this kind of work many times. Palu could skillfully use a foot-long scalpel to cut and separate the flesh and blood of the tough Thanner Re demons. A large number of fresh materials had been obtained in the recent battles, which gave him the opportunity to use his knowledge of voodoo to research and develop new types of potions. These three demons are Vrak, Bugala, and Dretch. They are also the Thanner Re race's biological samples that we have obtained the most besides the acid fog worms. Palu picked up the sterilized scalpel and wiped it on his leather apron to remove the residual alcohol on it. He pointed at the dissected specimens one by one. Through the physiological dissection of at least 100 of these creatures, I found that although the Thanner Re demons have different appearances and internal organs, even if they are of the same type, there are slight differences in their individual structures, but there is a common organ or tissue inside their bodies. Palu used the scalpel to cut the demon's limbs that were fixed to the dissection table by long nails. The silver-plated thin blade easily tore open the skin and muscles that were no longer tough due to death. Palu had done the same job many times, so he seemed to be at ease. The sharp vision of a megalosaurus allowed Keyes to clearly see the lymphatic structure inside the incision made by the ogre voodoo doctor. However, the color of the lymphoid tissue of this Thanner Re demon was very similar to the surrounding muscle tissue. It was like a wriggling earthworm covering its entire body. If not specifically pointed out, it would be easily overlooked. These lymphoid tissue-like structures are also present in the low-level acid mist worms. Paru immediately dissected another acid mist worm that was still alive as if he had seen through Quitha's guess. Then, he explained, in the voodoo technique I inherited, there's a kind of knowledge about how to perform a bloodline curse. The key to successfully performing it is to first find the bloodline commonality of the target of the curse. Therefore, I guess this is the bloodline commonality of the Thanner Re race. That's a very good idea. Extremely sharp observation skills and practical skills. Snader, who had just finished the work assigned by Keyes, couldn't help but praise Palu after hearing his explanation. This Demolik had always been very enthusiastic about various research work. He didn't have any prejudice against Palu's views, just because he was an ogre that the drows didn't think highly of. Keyes also somewhat agreed with the ogre voodoo doctor's point of view, but he still had some doubts. As a creature of the underworld, in fact, life doesn't need the support of any body organs to exist. The concept of existence itself is the basis of its existence. We have also discovered through previous dissections that some demons have digestive organs such as intestines, but they don't have excretory organs. Therefore, they don't swallow food to maintain their lives, but simply to satisfy their body's desire for flesh and blood. Moreover, even if they are the same kind of Thanner Re demon, their internal organs may not be exactly the same. Their various organs are like fillers that are randomly created. Then, what is the special function of this universal tissue or organ? The question hit the nail on the head, and Paru snapped his fingers excitedly, signaling everyone to calm down. He wanted to use the experiment to tell everyone the answer to his discovery. The ogre voodoo doctor transformed into a skilled anatomist. He first cut the smallest dretch specimen on the dissection table and meticulously separated the muscles on the arm of this weak Tana re-demon from the demon lymph hidden in it. Then, he completely removed the demon lymph that existed in the living acid mist worm that had been skinned, leaving only a small part connected to the brain. Finally, he implanted the demon lymph in the arm of the dretch into the body of the worm. Just as he was about to ask for help, the demonic Snader, who had been watching the experiment for a long time, cast a elementary restoration on the worm. Under the effect of the restoration spell, the experimental carrier implanted with a part of the dretch's demon lymph quickly recovered its vitality that was gradually dissipating due to the dissection. This casting a healing spell like elementary restoration required the caster to continuously expend magic power. To a demonic, this loss was simply insignificant. But this top-level undead creature, who was a master of magic control, immediately noticed a trace of abnormality. Casting such a spell on the worm seemed to consume a little more magic power. Snader immediately got the answer he wanted. The acid worm that was fixed with a long nail on the dissection table was healed by the restoration spell, and this was not all. The dretch's demon lymph tissue had an effect. The worm's body was constantly twisting and twisting. Its original body was constantly expanding, and the lich's excess restoration energy provided energy for this process. A new characteristic was reflected on its body. The body of the worm gradually turned into the shape of a demon's arm. From its color and size, it was very similar to the arm of the dretch. The ogre witch doctor was very satisfied with the results of his experiment. He took the worm out of the nail and threw it to the demonic Snader, who had a new body. The first Tana re-demons were produced after the ancient Obilus lords threw the fallen souls of mortals into the abyssal blood pool. Most of the Tana re-demons were originally abyssal worms, a type of worm that looked very similar to the acid mist worms. These worms then accumulated energy by devouring each other, and the energy they accumulated drove them to evolve abnormally, thus producing all kinds of Tana re-demons. In theory, all Tana re-demons used the same set of evolutionary templates, but because of the different souls that fell into the abyss, they evolved in different directions. Through this experiment, I can draw the following conclusion. The evolutionary template in the demons never disappeared, but it was passed down as a common bloodline. At the same time, the dominant part was carried by the demon's lymphatic tissue, which affected the appearance and ability of various demons. Chapter 75. Not only did Para's experiment prove his conjecture, but it also proved that one could not judge a book by its cover. Even among the ogres, who were known for their stupidity, there were still individuals as extraordinary as the three of them. Mr. Peru, how can your research help us in our current situation? The goblin Renaz was the one who asked the question. This goblin great engineer was different from Snade, who was also a researcher. He was more rational and focused on the practical aspects of his research. Peru seemed to have expected this question. He took out 2 to 3 materials from his potion pouch, and took out some demon lymph from the Vrock's body on the dissection table. Then, as he softly chanted a voodoo spell that others could not even pronounce, he weighed the proportions of the ingredients he took out before putting them together with the Vrock's demon lymph into a crystal bowl beside him. He then crushed them and mixed them well. "Please help me hold that mutated acid mist worm in place," Peru said to Snade, who had just received the mutated acid mist worm and was carefully inspecting it. Snade readily accepted the request. He admired the ogre voodoo doctor's meticulous work and was naturally willing to be an assistant for this experiment. With just a snap of his fingers, an invisible force field claw firmly bound the experimental subject and slowly moved it closer to Paru so that he could conduct the experiment. After nodding to express his gratitude, the ogre voodoo doctor once again chanted a voodoo spell while moving his hands according to a certain rhythm. Following his voice and movements, the mixture that he had mixed into powder immediately turned into a cloud of thick fog. Under Para's command, this cloud of fog shrouded the mutated acid mist worm. Then, something shocking happened. The experimental mannequin's form changed again. The acid mist worm that was shrouded in the fog of the potion, which had already grown a Dretch's forearm, was squeezed back into its body like clay. At the same time, wart-like protrusions that could only be found under the Vrock's feathers that were used to produce spores slowly appeared on the unlucky experimental subject. However, perhaps because there was not enough energy to support it, or because the total amount of substances in the potion was not enough to induce its evolution, the evolution of this acid mistworm had just begun to stagnate. Not only that, but due to the Demolica's restoration spell, the vitality of the experimental body had greatly increased. But now the acid mistworm, which had fallen into a stagnant state of evolution, began to show a large number of wrinkles all over its skin due to dehydration, and it also emitted a decaying smell that only old creatures would have. This was very abnormal in itself. The demons of the lower realm, as beings of spirit and body, theoretically would never naturally age. Ogre Voodoo Dr. Paru looked at the results of his experiment with satisfaction. He explained to everyone, "I used a voodoo poison that is often used to stimulate the bloodline potential of living creatures. However, the rate of effectiveness of this potion is actually very low. It was originally developed by my troll teacher in order to increase the strength of the tribe. However, among the newborn cubs that were fed the medicine, this medicine only had a slight effect on the three of us brothers." Paru's expression became slightly gloomy when he mentioned his teacher, who had selflessly taught him his skills. He put down the tools in his hand and picked up the troll skull staff that was placed next to him. He paused for a moment before continuing. "In fact, the reason why this potion is not very successful is because it lacks a guiding material, a genetic material that can be compatible with the blood of the user, but also belongs to a higher level of life. The demon lymph of the Vrock is a very good material to guide the evolution of an acid mist worm." At this point, there was no need to go into details. At this moment, everyone present was far more intelligent than mortals, and they quickly caught up with Paru's train of thought. For ordinary demons, evolving to a higher level of life was their lifelong pursuit. For them, this was not only a desire for strength, but also a necessity to carry out their will to destroy. Whether it was the weak Dretch or the powerful Baylor, they were all under the influence of the Abyss will to constantly seek to increase their strength and practice more crazy methods of destruction. However, the evolution of demons could not go against the law of conservation of energy. The will of the Abyss could not let them create something out of nothing. Only by accumulating enough strength could demons successfully evolve to a higher level of life. This was one of the remaining laws of order in the chaotic abyss. The purpose of Paru's potion was to induce the acid mistworm as an experimental subject to enter a state of evolution. However, the worm itself lacked the energy needed to complete the evolution, so it overdrafted its own life force and became half dead. Of course, inducing demons to evolve could create more powerful demons in other abyss levels. However, due to the worm law of the acid mist canyon, almost all the demons that lived here were parasitized by the acid mist worms. Most of the power that the demons painstakingly accumulated for a long time was stolen by the parasites. After the evolution, there would not be enough accumulation to complete the evolution process. Therefore, there was no better place than here to use this voodoo potion as a biological weapon. If a higher-level demon lymph was used as a guiding material, Paru could modify it and create a new potion. It could be used on a large scale in the future battlefield. It was very likely that they could defeat the attacking demon army without shedding a drop of blood. Although he had only experimented on the Thanner Re demons and did not use the ancient Obilus demons or the immaterial Lamala demons as supplementary materials, the effects of Paru's potion were already very shocking. After all, the demon army of the Abyss was mostly made up of countless Thanner Re demons. As for the problem of the materials needed to create the potion on a large scale. As for the other materials, the Demolic Snade was in charge of the fortress. Keyes could order him to open the Otherworld Gate or communicate with the dimensional merchants and obtain them through trade. He could even use the limited wish spell and wish spell to solve some of the requirement. These were not a problem. Only the demon lymph could be obtained from the few demon corpses that could be preserved from the battlefield. Therefore, Keyes did not intend to use the tactic of adding fuel to the fire. The biological weapon that Paru developed could be used at a specific time to determine the outcome of the battle. The Blue Dragon youth thought for a moment. After making up his mind, he asked, "Paru, what is the name of the troll who taught you voodoo skills?" After hearing Keyes's question, the ogre voodoo doctor thought for a moment and shook his head. He seemed a little disappointed. The old troll did not have a name. It was only because he would always make a rumbling sound when cooking ingredients and mixing potions that the children in the tribe would call him Grandpa Rumble. Then this potion shall be called the Rumble Potion. Chapter 76. While Keyes and the others were researching how to use the secret weapon, the Potion, to surprise the demon army that was about to surround the fortress, Ogre Brew, who had been entrusted with an important task by the commander of the Bartho mercenary fortress, was busy preparing for other war necessities. More and more injured soldiers began to return to the battlefield medical camp that was very characteristic of the Hell of Bartho, thanks to the unremitting efforts of the wizards and evil priests. Although the elemental prosthetics made by the spellcasters were not that easy to use and would slowly affect the consciousness of the mercenaries from the material plane, these soldiers who did not have the regenerative ability of the demons would be able to pick up their weapons again. This way, the resources of the fortress would not be wasted. The fortress's defense system had revealed some problems when the Firewalkers' air attack failed. The fortress had no way to effectively counter attacks from the air. It was too dangerous for the commander, the young Blue Dragon, to lead the elite Batsu Devil as a suicide squad. Who knew what kind of monster was hiding in the demon army? Secondly, it would create a vacuum of high-level combat power. If not for Snade's sneak attack, the Wolf Snake Devil Warlord could have caused more damage in the fortress. To solve this problem, the ogre blacksmith Nalu, under the guidance of the great goblin engineer Riknaz, used the best materials to create many giant crossbows in the workshop of the fortress. After that, the spellcasters engraved various magical effects on the crossbows, such as gravity arrays and explosion arrays. The grooves were also filled with silver powder. Once the specially made crossbow bolts were fired, these arrangements would take effect the moment they hit the target. The floating beasts that posed a great threat to the fortress's defense system would immediately repeat the tragedy of the Hindenburg if they were hit. Of course, after the war machine known as the Bartho Mercenary Fortress was put into operation, they had made far more preparations. As the saying went, winning a war depends on weapons, and winning a war depends on the soldiers. If the army was a melting pot, then the army on the battlefield was the largest melting pot in the multiverse. Most of the defenders of the fortress were warriors that the devils had recruited from various material planes. These people had different appearances, spoke languages that they could not understand, and had different customs and habits. But in the big furnace that was the fortress, they were growing at an astonishing speed. Not only did slaying the demons hone their combat skills, the bloody battle also urged them to constantly learn new things. For example, when these people were first sent to this camp, only an extremely small number of them could grasp the purgatory language. However, in less than 10 days, most of the surviving mercenaries were able to speak a few sentences in the language of the lower realms. As for understanding simple orders, it was a piece of cake. Perhaps these people had different occupations before coming here. Some were rangers, some were barbarians, and some were rogues. But at this moment they only had one identity: soldiers. Soldiers who fought with their lives on the line in order to survive this bloody battle. Perhaps due to the influence of the rules of the 9 prisons of Bader, these soldiers spontaneously formed combat teams under the rules of their respective organizations. They cooperated with each other to better resist the invading demons on the battlefield. This choice was not out of loyalty. In fact, the army of the 9 prisons of Bader had never advocated everyone for themselves, and I for everyone. The cooperation between the soldiers was only for themselves, so that they would not be attacked from both sides, and so that they would have a greater chance of survival. Therefore, every soldier carefully made friends with comrades who were beneficial to their survival. The rule of the strong wins was now the accepted standard of this choice. Our broom brows Dalton was one of the best. Not only were his former subordinates who had survived several major battles, some of the other soldiers also liked to gather under him and listen to his orders. As for Jason, the former paladin who was now paying debts on the battlefield, he was also well liked by some soldiers because of his excellent fighting skills and his clean and efficient way of slaying demons. However, unlike Dalton, Johnson had never promised to protect anyone. First, it was because of the maxim of silence. Second, this sinful paladin, who Dalton thought was very similar to Dalton's son, stubbornly believed that he was not worthy of shouldering anyone's expectations. Only by cleansing himself of his mistakes and becoming a paladin again would he be qualified. However, his lack of initiative and irresponsible attitude would occasionally infuriate some of the soldiers who were already difficult to deal with. "You really don't know what's good for you. I only recommended you to join Ferguson's team because I thought highly of you." However, before he could finish his sentence, a large palm slapped the back of the ranger's head. This ranger was suspected to be a mix of Darrow-Dwarven bloodline. Without any resistance, this troublesome soldier fell to the ground in a daze. "Sorry, he was too loud and disturbed me," Dalton explained to Jason, who was looking at him. No one objected, not even the other members of Ferguson's team who came with the paladin. After all, this was Barthol's mercenary fortress from another plane. Dalton was a tough nut to crack. After several battles, he had established his authority in this fortress. Not to mention, he also had to deal with his subordinates who were waiting for orders. No one would stand up for a paladin who looked like a half-baked paladin. As if he hadn't had enough, Dalton bent down and picked up the paladin's weapon. It was a heavy lacquered longbow made of purple wood and 5 feet long when it wasn't strung. Pulling it could shoot an arrow at least 200 paces away. At close range, it could easily pierce through armor. The arm of the longbow was very smooth, indicating that it had been used for many years. The body of the longbow was evenly coated with heavy lacquer, making it very suitable for maintaining its elasticity in the wet rainforest. Overall, it was well maintained and could be considered a valuable item. Although Broom Eyebrows wasn't an expert in archery, he was still a veteran in his own right. He gently pulled the longbow a few times. He was afraid that he would damage the weapon if he pulled too hard. Satisfied, he threw the longbow to one of his subordinates who also used archery. "This bow is okay. We need to find a good home for it. Besides, it's not convenient for such a short guy to use such a long bow." "Ha!" As Dalton spoke, he mockingly gestured at the paladin's height. His subordinates and the surrounding soldiers burst into laughter. Jason glanced at Dalton and didn't say anything. He quietly got up and grabbed the paladin who was lying on the ground. Then, he put the paladin on his shoulder and walked out of the crowd. Judging from the direction he was heading, he should be heading for the field medical camp. "Boss, that kid doesn't know what's good for him," one of Dalton's subordinates whispered beside him. Dalton turned around and gave him a fierce glare. He looked at Jason's back and sighed slightly. "He's just like that paladin kid," Dalton cursed inwardly. Chapter 77. The War-Snake Demon Warlord died here? A spellcaster wearing a starry robe made of mithril stood at the edge of a forest far away from the Bardoplanar fortress. He didn't even turn his head as he asked one of the first-generation cataclysm bugs standing behind him as an attendant. The spellcaster was standing on the boundary between the Avernus soil and the acid fog canyon, which had been teleported here together with the Bardoplanar fortress. The soil in front of him emitted an exceptionally rich aura of the Nine Hells' natural order. This powerful spell-caster born in the abyss felt a sense of disgust from the bottom of his heart. Helmet, the dragon's subbody, didn't sneak in alone like he did against the tyrannical god Legion not long ago. He didn't directly find the commander of the Bardoplanar fortress and destroy it. He asked the attendant of the cataclysm bugs, which he rarely did, in hopes of getting some advice. However, communicating with a creature that was born with schizophrenia meant that he wouldn't get a satisfactory answer. Lord Deputy, it's not just the War-Snake Demon Warlord. The giant skull advisor Langer also died here. How could Langer die so easily? That's right. I heard that he cast a cloning spell on himself. Maybe he's already resurrected. That's right. Maybe the War-Snake Demon also died and escaped. Those who refuse to accept a tyrant's descendant aren't reliable. Even in front of the terrifying dragon's subbody, the cataclysm bugs couldn't change their habit of talking. However, Helmet didn't feel any anger. Perhaps he just wanted to find someone to chat with to relieve the boredom of waiting. What he had been waiting for had only arrived after he had listened to the Scourge Swarm's endless conspiracy for a while. A few strange pink-skinned acid fog worms crawled out of the ground around Helmet. The communication worms had already arrived. Unlike the previous cataclysm bugs that had been turned into living specimens, Helmet could directly analyze the answer he wanted to hear from the high-frequency chirps of these little guys. That drow lich has indeed betrayed the tyrant worm. The lycanthropy is dead, and its symbiotic axe has yet to be reshaped. The Colossus seems to have a clone, but it's not in the acid fog canyon. Based on that, the nearest demonic army would be able to wipe out the Bot-Or expeditionary army that appeared out of nowhere. Helmet cast a spell to replenish the few communication worms' stamina to travel through the ground at high speed. At the same time, he ordered more demons to come. Helmet of the Bardoplanar fortress army left the place. Helmet, the cataclysm bugs, subbody's SSSSSS body. Of Helmet's head suddenly turned his head. And Helmet's subbody turned of, who was standing of Helmet. Of ditto. I think it's better if we don't. Before this insect could finish its objection, it was immediately devoured by the other acid mist worms that made up the body of the calamity worms. Well, it's good that you don't have any objections. Hemtar nodded affirmatively and pointed at the scourge bugs with his right hand. Driven by the sudden effect of the force field, the first-generation calamity bug swarm flew towards the sky of the acid fog canyon, which was always illuminated by the volcano's radiance. It was as if a rocket had been installed in it. One of Hemtar's hands was in a casting motion, constantly adjusting the trajectory of the rocket swarm of calamity bugs, while the other hand was casting another spell. Doing two things at once without causing any problems. When he felt that it was about time, he raised both of his hands at the same time. At the same time, he chanted the incantation to cast the spell. Maximum spell, Note 1. Meteor burst. Four meteorites created out of thin air by spells suddenly took shape in the air above the acid fog canyon plain. These meteorite-like creations carried the calamity bugs that were forced into the air and fell straight towards the mercenary fortress of the Bartho Plain. A good show is about to begin, the dragon's subbody muttered to himself after finishing his work. There was no sign of exhaustion on his body, which was usually seen on high-level spellcasters after casting a top-level evocation spell. However, he did not continue to cast other spells. At this time, Hemtar only wanted to quietly watch the show directed by himself. Under the effect of maximum spell, the high-temperature meteorites that fell from the sky were all more than 5 meters in diameter. Moreover, under the deliberate control of the dragon's subbody, they were in a condensed form, which made the fall even more shocking. As soon as this spell was formed, the Demolic Snade and Quess keenly sensed the magic waves of this top-notch evoking spell. The other spellcasters in the mercenary fortress of the Bartho Plain also noticed the meteorite. With such a powerful spell effect and such a large meteorite appearing above their heads, even the warriors who did not know any spells could feel the urgency of the situation. Naturally, they would not sit still and wait for death. How many times can we fight in life? If we don't fight now, when will we? Anti-magic ray, dissociation, Bigby's grappling palm. All kinds of counterspells were cast out by the spellcasters as if they were free. However, the strategic spells that were released by the clone of the Lord of Abyss above the legendary level were certainly not easy to deal with. Not to mention, there was also a first-generation disaster bug swarm inside the meteor. This extra, who had been carefully selected by the great director Helmut Hall to act in the big movie directed and acted by himself, was very dedicated. He did not forget his duty even when he was stuffed in the gap between the meteorite. Many acid mist worms gushed out of his body and directly used his flesh to resist the single-target spells cast to stop the meteorites from falling to the ground. Therefore, except for some area of effect counterspells, all other interference with the meteorites were useless. One could imagine what it would be like when a meteor with a single diameter of 5 meters and a combined diameter of more than 10 meters, with some magma on its surface due to the friction with the air, smashed straight into the top of the head. Panic quickly filled the hearts of the defenders in Bator Fortress like bean sprouts that had been soaked in water. Fortunately, when the panic in the defenders intensified and began to develop into despair, they were pleasantly surprised to see 2 dark iron fists suddenly appear out of thin air. Skyrath Fist. Some spellcasters who were knowledgeable recognized this spell, and an emotion called hope began to emerge in the hearts of the defenders. Although the 2 tightly clenched fists were not as powerful as the meteors of the meteor burst, the deep color and sturdy appearance of the fists made it easy for people to see that they contained a huge amount of power. Of course, in the face of the terrifying kinetic energy of the meteorites transformed from potential energy, even such a pair of giant fists did not dare to directly face them. The Skyrath fist could only find the right time to continuously bombard the meteorites from the side. It would be best if it could directly detonate the spell and make it disintegrate in the air. If not, at least it could change the direction of the meteorites. The one who controlled this spell was Keys, the commander of Bartho Plain. However, he also used the strange item borrowed from Snyder to activate this spell. It had to be said that the young blue dragon's decision to hire this Demolic instead of kill him was very wise. This legendary spellcaster had been obsessed with studying escape spells for the past few hundred years and had no interest in collecting otherworldly possessions. However, after thousands of years of accumulation, even an ordinary megalosaurus could not compare to him. He could be said to be very rich. Since he had lost his physical body, he could only temporarily reside in the body of this living creature bodyguard, the terrifying armor. Snyder's previous collection, a pair of strange item gloves engraved with the enhanced version of Skyrath Fist, could only be used by Keys. The young blue dragon wore the gloves in the battle command room of Bartho Plain and punched the air again and again. Even mechanical puppet number 21, who always liked to make weird jokes, looked at Keys nervously. No one laughed at his exaggerated actions. After all, judging from the trajectory of the meteorites, the target of the bombardment was where everyone was: the battle command room of Bartho Plain. Fortunately, the countermeasure worked. Even with the Scourge Swarm's obstruction, the continuous bombardment of iron fists did not cause the meteor to explode, but it still managed to deviate the falling meteor, causing it to brush past the edge of the wall and crash into the ground outside the fortress. Note 1. In the game, there is a saying of rolling dice. Probability is used to fit the influence of objective factors in reality. Maximum spell, a supreme magic skill, refers to the maximum value of the damage and range of the released spell. This article refers to this setting. Chapter 78. Even though the fortress had escaped the calamity, the prismatic wall outside the fortress was damaged to a certain extent even though it was only swept by the meteor burst's tail. The aftershock of the explosion even tore the wall apart and expanded through the gap, creating a huge hole in the impregnable defense system. The meteor burst, which had changed its direction due to Key's heavenly wrath punch, plowed a trench on the ground of the acid fog canyon, fully demonstrating the terrifying power of the spell. Looking at the trench that extended from the fortress to the front, the dragon's subbody standing at the edge of the fungus forest shrugged and said helplessly, "It seems that someone doesn't want us to show up. But with just you guys? We can't stop the attack of the Demon Lord," Snade hurriedly said after Keys took off the strange item glove that had activated the heavenly wrath punch. Although he had become an undead creature, he should not have any emotions such as fear. However, the blue hellfire in the eye sockets of Snade's skull burned brighter. He continued to emphasize, "No one is more familiar with the fluctuation of the spell than I am. That is the characteristic of the spell cast by the Tyrant Worm's new incarnation, the dragon's subbody Helmuter. As long as this incarnation appears, the Tyrant Worm will lurk beside it, waiting for an opportunity to attack. At that time, the group of powerful spellcasters, personal trainers, who were treated as distinguished guests by the Tyrant Worm were attacked and killed in this way." However, Demolik did not say this out loud. Of course, Keys knew that his new employee was terrified at this moment, and so was he. What was a Demon Lord? They were the most powerful demons standing at the top of the food chain in the Abyss. These unique demons could command the entire Abyss level that they ruled. Even the weakest among them was comparable to the strength of a god. What was the incarnation of a Demon Lord? The incarnation of a Demon Lord was the physical manifestation of a part of the Demon Lord's life force. It was created as an agent to allow the Demon Lord to safely hide behind the scenes and plot his evil schemes. However, this was only the relationship between the Demon Lord and its incarnation in most cases. The Tyrant Worm in the Acid Fog Canyon dimension and its dragon's subbody were inseparable. The incarnation that this guy created was actually growing in its own giant mouth. The other Demon Lords had various guesses. Some thought that this terrifying worm was too greedy. It wasn't even willing to share its power with its avatar. Some believed that this was because the Tyrant Worm's intelligence was still too low. It was unable to plan long-term plans to establish demon orders in other material planes like other Demon Lords. There were also some who believed that it was a kind of trapping nature, just like the anglerfish that lived in the deep sea. After all, everyone knew that this Demon Lord known as the Tyrant Worm was actually an experimental creation of the previous Lord of the Acid Fog Canyon Plain. Perhaps he had mixed in the characteristics of other creatures when he was created. All kinds of things were discussed differently. Keys was naturally unaware of the above conjectures. He was neither a big shot with extensive connections in the bottomless abyss, nor was he a reader favored by the Fate Weaver. Of course, even if he knew this, it would not help him improve his current situation. The Demon Lord's incarnation, Helmuter, and the Tyrant Worm must be lurking nearby. They were eyeing the mercenary fortress of Bartho that he was stationed in. "We have nowhere to retreat. We have no other choice." This was the final answer given by the young blue dragon. As for Keys himself, he clearly remembered what happened the moment he was airdropped to this plane. The Batsu Devil did not give him any chance to go back on his word. They must have prepared a backup plan for the situation where the commander fled at the last minute. At that time, the best situation would be to hide in every corner of the multiverse and avoid the pursuit of the demon assassins. The others in the fortress would not have a chance. They could only fight to the end and find a way out in the midst of death. Most of the mercenaries from other planes that were arranged by the Batsu Devil's higher-ups had signed the contract. Breaking the contract in the demon's contract would result in death. Even if they did not sign the contract, the current objective conditions were enough to make the choice of escape directly linked to quick death. Unless the spellcasters had abilities comparable to the Demolic Snader, the idea of secretly opening the gate to another world under the eyes of the demon Lord of the Abyss and the Batsu Devil Gendarmerie was simply deceiving themselves. If the soldiers chose to abandon the defensive position and walk out of the fortress at this time, it was no different from seeking death. Even if they avoided the patrolling Batsu Gendarmerie, the demon army that had begun to gather outside the fortress could make them start anew, just be reincarnated earlier. Enemy attack. Be careful, the demons are starting to attack the fortress. Little bastards, come out. The demon army that gathered outside the fortress was far larger than before. Those who had a little prestige and power among the defenders knew that it was time to fight for their lives. They spontaneously organized and integrated their forces. It was worth mentioning that this action really sped up the gathering of the demons in Bartho Fortress. The defenders put on their pig-nose gas masks, picked up their weapons and protective gear, and quickly rushed to the positions they were in charge of. Helmet, who was standing on the edge of the fungus forest like an old monk in meditation, opened his slightly closed eyes. This great director, who had previously failed at the box office, made a comeback and began to prepare for his next work. He had the resources of an entire level of the Abyss at his disposal, so he naturally had the courage to bring money into the cast. And after summing up the experience of previous failures, the director even decided to put down his pride and personally perform his acting skills. After all, counting on the demons to be good protagonists was no different from believing that, if there is a similarity, then it is purely a coincidence. It was different from this great director who had regrouped and was in a flourishing mood. The defenders of Bartho Fortress, who were designated as supporting characters or background by him at this time, saw that the scale of this demon attack was far larger than before, but they were not in the mood to be happy at all. Even if they had defeated their opponents several times, and the continuous fierce battles had sharpened the nerves of this group of mercenaries from another dimension, they were still inevitably tired. At this time, these people, half of them were holding their weapons out of obedience to the rules, and the other half were holding their weapons out of the desire to survive in the midst of death. Keyes had already expected this. Previously, when he took the lead to kill the troll and the firewalker, part of the plan was to motivate the soldiers under his command. But now that he knew that there might be a demon lord lurking among the enemy, the young blue dragon had no intention of foolishly rushing up to kill himself. The young blue dragon chose another method from the books on Earth to motivate the soldiers. He remembered that in the book, The Emperor's Bayonet, there was a technique on how to use artillery tactics by bombarding the enemy directly to make the enemy lose their courage, and at the same time, motivate the soldiers on one side. Although it was not to the extent of being able to recite it backwards, Keyes still remembered most of the content in the book with the help of his retrieval memory that he had developed as a programmer. The bastion design that was specially followed in the construction of the fortress's defense system played an important role at this time. The protruding city walls allowed the gunpowder weapons, which Keyes referred to as cannons, and the Batsu touted as Hellscream, to form a crossfire boundary. Under the command of the commander, the silver-plated cannonballs, which were mixed with some silver shavings that could form a large cloud of silver mist, were hurled at the demon army without sparing any effort. Seeing the group of Tana re-demons that had just gathered and mindlessly charged at the fortress being killed like chives being cut, this group of mercenaries from another dimension who had no self-restraint rang out loud cheers and roars of excitement. He reached out his palm and touched the silver mist that rose in front of his eyes due to the cannonballs exploding and dispersing when they hit his body. The slight pain on his fingertips, accompanied by the painful wails of the surrounding demons, made Hemtar, the demon lord's dragon sub-body, deeply intoxicated. He gradually indulged in this beautiful picture that played out because of him, with war and death as the main melody. Everything has just begun. Chapter 79. This is just the beginning. Keyes frowned as he stood on the city walls, staring at the demon army that was unable to advance due to the bombardment. He didn't need to spend much effort to come up with such a conclusion. Even using his brain to think was redundant. The demon army showed no signs of collapsing. It was as if every one of them had turned into believers of the god of valor. Even though they were heavily injured by the silver bullets, they continued to charge forward. Blue floated to the platform in front of the fort's command center in his gaseous form. He had just finished dealing with the mission Keyes had given him and had returned to report, "Everything is in place. We're just waiting for your orders." Keyes nodded. He knew that he had to find traces of the Demon Lord and his avatar as soon as possible. Otherwise, it would be a waste of ammunition no matter how many towers he slaughtered. Moreover, he estimated that the special ammunition he had prepared would be used up after a few rounds of bombardment. The cannons would have to stop firing as well, or they would be in danger of exploding. As expected, after another 3 rounds of bombardment, the cannons manned by barbed cannoneers began to misfire. Most of the Naili demons in the higher towers, including the dozen or so Skyburn walkers left on this floor, noticed this as well. While they ordered their subordinates to send themselves to their deaths, a few of them couldn't wait any longer and charged into the fray. They quickly passed through the vacuum created by the cannons. The battle between the defenders of the fort and the demons was like a bolt from the blue. Fortunately, the morale of the defenders had been boosted, and they didn't fall into a disadvantageous position in the first clash with the demons. Due to their nature, only a few demons noticed the loophole in the fort's defenses caused by the meteors and launched a surprise attack on it. Even though the fortress was in a precarious situation, the mercenaries defending the fortress were mostly violent and belligerent. After their morale had been boosted, they had gotten used to the battlefield where flesh and blood flew everywhere like a meat grinder. Of the 3 ogre brothers, Neru, who was the largest of them all, was fighting the most ferociously. This ogre, who was far larger than his peers, waved his newly modified ebony flail and blocked the gap in the fortress defenses. Any demon that wanted to take advantage of this opportunity would be met with a head-on attack. Unlike the man-eating monster, Mechanical Puppet number 21, who was helping to hold the line, used an extremely efficient killing method to prove the axiom that in the world of martial arts, only sturdiness could not be overcome, and only speed could not be overcome. His refined gold fists were like agile snakes, often taking the life of an evil demon with a single strike. In addition to the duo responsible for nailing down this defensive loophole, the other defenders were also engaged in a fierce battle. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The sound of arrows tearing through the air was incessant. The Broom brothers, who had been rewarded by Boss Dalton with a purple shirt of fine craftsmanship, had indeed lived up to expectations. They had displayed the greatest power of this fine weapon. Previously, he had deliberately bribed a spellcaster with a small barrel of ale that was jokingly called the warrior's best friend by the defenders. Therefore, his eyes were currently blessed with eagle eye. This undoubtedly improved his already excellent shooting accuracy once again, allowing him to almost reach the terrifying realm of never missing a target. Well done, Barton boy. After an arrow pierced directly into the ear of a Virum that was emitting rotten spores from a tricky angle, Dalton finally found a chance to send the enemy off. I've already said that this bow is more suitable in your hands. Be careful. Dalton's praise suddenly turned into a warning. A Babu demon assassin stealthily approaching did not even have the time to launch a backstab before it was seen through by the master of the shadow thief, who had hidden himself very well. He then shouted a warning to the archer. But as the old saying goes, 100 words are not as good as a silence. It was a broad-bladed dagger that stabbed in from the side that really saved the archer's life. Jensen, who had paid for his crime, used his weapon's gauntlet to firmly entangle the Babu demon's thorn, and used his shield to directly smash the Tana re-assassin's skull. The former paladin, who was dressed no different from an ordinary sword and shield wielder, slightly raised his sword and shield and signaled to Dalton. The latter immediately understood what he wanted to say. "This idiot boy has some brains. He didn't waste the silver I spent a lot of money to get for him." The corner of Dalton's mouth rose, revealing an almost imperceptible chuckle that even he himself did not notice. After several battles, silver had become an important strategic resource. Naturally, there was an anti-corruption team formed by the Batsu demon within the fortress to monitor the use of silver ingot. However, Keyes' silver bullet offensive had used a lot of silver. Although most of it was corroded while killing the Tana re-demons, there were still some scattered scraps that would be collected when the battlefield was cleaned up and the demons' remains were collected. All the defenders had seen the lethality of silver against the demons, so these scraps had become a hot commodity in the black market that mercenaries from other planes had spontaneously formed. Those who were more particular would spend money to hire a spellcaster to help them wash the surface of their equipment with acid before letting the spellcaster plate the leftover silver on it. Those who were more casual would directly go to the forge in the fortress, melt the leftover silver, and pour it directly on their weapons before borrowing a hammer to hammer it. That was all there was to it. They only needed to invest in a small piece of these scraps to ensure their safety when slaughtering demons. That was why any mercenary from another plane who had some worldly possessions would fork out money to buy these things. Dalton had always been generous with his investment in life-saving equipment, and this time was no exception. After using some of the silver plating materials he bought for himself, he found a time when no one was looking to throw the rest to Jensen, who looked like a pauper at first glance. Glancing at the sparkling silver light on the sword and shield of this second-rate kid, Dalton understood that the salutation was to express his gratitude. Looking at the former sacred samurai making a prayer gesture and once again rushing into the depths of the demon army, Dalton sighed softly. Damn it! Due to their alignment, the sacred samurai's attack could cause tons of damage to the chaotic and evil nature of the Tana re-demons. This was also where Jensen's confidence came from. As long as his faith was still there, the lethality of the divine energy he summoned would not diminish. The physical problem that limited his continuous summoning of divine energy was not a big problem for the former sacred samurai, who had been well rested, at this time when the battle had just begun. At least when the demons who were fighting separately and pushing each other began to gather to attack him, Jensen was still able to hold his weapon and armor steadily, and through his inner call, attach the divine energy to his shield. He threw the armor that contained divine energy with all his might, and it quickly bounced and hit the gathered demons in a semicircle. Shield bash, evil slashing slash. Chapter 80. In a confrontation between two armies, a true expert would not fly up and down as some people imagined. There was also no so-called fighting aura that would emit a biu-biu-biu sound. The strict training he had undergone to become a paladin had given him a strong physique and solid martial arts. Even in a bloody battlefield where demons were dancing wildly, this powerful warrior was still so dazzling. Although there was no exaggeration like the special effects, his simple movements of slaughtering demons made people feel that this was the epitome of violence. A broad short sword tempered with silver fragments and an iron shield embedded with silver shavings, in the hands of this efficient demon terminator, turned something rotten into something magical. A human with such simple weapons could actually face a horde of Thaner demons without being at a disadvantage. This was truly admirable. What a fierce warrior! The blue dragon youth, who was wielding his adamantine scythe sword, could not help but applaud when he saw this scene. This time, the demon army that came to attack the city was personally mobilized by the Lord. The number and quality of the army exceeded expectations. The mercenaries from another plane had already made some arrangements in the fortress according to the original plan. In order to gain more time to prepare, the commander of the fortress had no choice but to brave the arrows and stones and join the battle. Recently, Keyes had been training for a while every day according to the 9-sword catalogue that he had bought from the merchant Yugoloth. This was the perfect time for him to test the results of his training. The blue dragon youth used the army sword technique that was suitable for fighting. His stance was stable, his steps were agile, and he could clearly see the complicated situation around him. Slashing and stabbing were the most common forms of attack in this technique. The way to block was also to use the principle of the weapon to block the enemy's attack. However, as the saying went, a strong man can defeat 10 skilled men. Even if Keyes transformed into a human, he was still a human megalosaurus. The moves he used were all powerful and heavy. With the combination of the strong and sharp adamantine weapon, there were very few demons who could be his match. The blue dragon boy had praised Jensen before, and the latter had also noticed him. At first, Jensen was a little surprised that this young man dared to charge into the depths of the demon army just like him. But after seeing his powerful moves, this former paladin could not help but think helplessly in his heart. He's still lacking. Although he's strong, his moves are always old. It'll be dangerous if his physical strength can't keep up. I hope I still have the strength to take care of him when that happens. He did not recognize that the young man was the highest authority in the Bartholomew fortress. Although Keyes had been on the battlefield personally, he was either in his megalosaurus form or too far away from the ordinary defenders. Jensen naturally did not recognize Keyes's appearance. However, he was a former Saint Samurai after all, so he naturally had a good heart. In the midst of the fight, Jensen was constantly adjusting his position to get closer to Keyes. He planned to take this young man with him when he retreated later. The martial arts of the army sword would improve the user's insight. As a megalosaurus, Keyes had a racial advantage in this aspect. Naturally, he would strengthen it now. He only glanced at Jensen's movements from the corner of his eye and guessed what he was thinking. What a rare guy in the lower realm. I didn't expect to fight side by side with a paladin again. Keyes thought of a good friend who liked to play the role of a paladin on Earth. He could not help but sigh. Because of the far-fetched but very reasonable relationship, the blue dragon boy took out a small silver bottle from his pocket and found the right time to throw it to Jensen. It's for you. Since the others probably can't use it anyway, it'll be easier to smear it on your weapon and kill the demons later. Keyes threw out the small silver bottle, which contained a few drops of the leftover Hongda holy oil. Due to the problem of alignment, this holy oil from the angel race in the Bartholomew fortress was rarely used in the Bartholomew fortress. Only senior mages like Keyes and Snade could cast the alignment adaptation spell on themselves and not be hurt by the backlash. Jason, on the other hand, did not have such a problem at all. Although this former paladin was stripped of his title as a paragon and thrown into the bloody battlefield to repay his debt, he had never deviated from the good side of order, and the god he believed in did not abandon him. With his quick reflexes and strong martial arts skills, Jensen still had the strength to take the gift from Keyes while fighting the demons. He gently knocked the blade of the broad-bladed dagger and pushed it away, while his other forearm, which was covered with a shield, held the small silver bottle in the palm of his hand. This smooth movement made Keyes applaud once again. The young blue dragon boy said loudly, "Why don't you hurry up and try it? There are many demons here waiting for us to kill." After saying this, Keys took out the same small silver bottle and crushed it without hesitation, gently smearing the oily liquid inside on his weapon. As if a spark had been thrown into hot oil, the scythe sword in his hand instantly ignited with a dazzling flame, burning away the stains of the evil demon's blood that had been left on it from killing the evil demons. Seeing this scene, the former Saint Samurai did not suspect anything and turned his weapon into a torch in the same way. However, when he held it in his hand, he clearly felt that although the flame was amazing, it did not burn his hands at all. On the contrary, as the flame burned, a very comfortable warmth flowed from his palms to his limbs and bones. This is the feeling of positive energy. The familiar warmth made Jensen, who was now wandering in the bottomless abyss, feel very surprised. The tiredness caused by the continuous battles was swept away in the blink of an eye. Due to the restriction of the maxim of silence, he could not personally thank the young man who gave him this valuable item, but he was ready to express his gratitude with practical actions. With this essential oil rich in positive energy, my combat power has increased a lot. When we retreat, we must take this generous brother with us. This was just one of the small episodes that appeared from time to time on the battlefield. In fact, the Tanna-Ri who came to attack the fortress seemed to have gone crazy under the mobilization of the Demon Lord. Even when the cannons on the walls of the fortress were fired again, the soldiers still refused to retreat even after leaving behind tens of thousands of corpses. They were determined to erase Fort Bator from the plain of Acid Fog Canyon. At this time, the battlefield slowly turned into a huge meat grinder. Although the defenders of Bator Fortress were rotating blades at this time, the Tanna-Ri demons were minced meat. But once the physical strength of the defenders began to decline, the situation would inevitably be reversed. Mortals could not compete with the demons of the lower realm in endurance. At that time, the scene would become a one-sided massacre. Moreover, so far, the incarnation of the Demon Lord and the tyrant worm hiding beside him had not appeared in the army. The danger that could not be seen was 100 times more dangerous than the danger that could be seen. These two hidden in the sea formed by the Tanna-Ri demon army was always a huge hidden danger. After cutting down another demon that wanted to attack him from behind, Keys realized that he had to make a decision immediately. The arrangement in the fortress had reached the final stage. Success or failure depended on this one move. He had to fight for this time no matter what. Retreat. Contrary to the previous paladin's expectations, the young man in front of him who was fighting fiercely just now took the initiative to retreat to the main camp. Jason had observed his moves. He should still have a lot of strength left. However, it seemed that because Keys had been in the position of commander for a long time, his words naturally had a convincing aura. Although Jason had doubts, he still resolutely carried out the young man's order. Retreat was not a route. If he wanted to retreat, he had to deal with the enemy chasing after him. Originally, Jason wanted to bring up the rear himself and buy some time for the young man to retreat, but this strange young man wanted him to personally carry out this challenging task. The style of the scythe in his hand changed in an instant. It changed from the simple and unadorned king's sword to a wild slash like a storm. Although this would give the demons a chance to sneak attack, given the powerful strength of the blue dragon young man, no demons could get close to him for a while. Seeing such a scene, Jason no longer pretended to be pretentious. He gave the young man a "be careful" look, and then took a deep breath. This deep breath obviously used a lot of strength. The pig's nose gas mask on his face made of metal and leather was slightly deformed. Shield bash, virtuous evil destroyer. Jason made one last assist for Keys before retreating. Just like the introduction, this once excellent paladin not only had a strong physique gained through training, but his firm belief also gave him the ability to use spells like Evil Slaying Slash. Not only that, but Jason could also use a skill that was often mastered by senior paladins who were much older than him. By calling on the holy power of virtuousness and attaching it to his weapon, His next attack would cause tons of damage to evil creatures. He threw the silver-inlaid shield that was filled with holy power like a frisbee into the group of demons that were entangled with Kith. Unlike before, the shield did not bounce back in an arc this time. Instead, the double amount of holy power caused the shield to explode. Jason's move was like throwing a high-explosive grenade in the middle of the enemies surrounding Keys. The broken shield and the surging holy light directly cleared a small group of Tana re-demons. When the deed was done, he would leave without leaving a trace. After finishing this move, the former paladin, who had the demeanor of an ancient hero, rushed straight in the opposite direction without looking back. Because they were deep in the enemy's formation, even the way back to their own formation was not easy. There were many Tana re-demons in front of them. The only advantage was that most of these demons blocking the way had their backs to them. Many mercenaries from other planes were either forced or spontaneously rushed into the enemy's formation in the fierce battle. The Tana re-demons blocking Jason's retreat were facing them at this time, so they could only leave their backs to the former paladin. Although the paladin advocated fairness and courage, he was not so pedantic as to talk about virtue with these Tana re-demons. In fact, without the protection of the shield, he did not want to confront the demons head-on. Holding a broad short sword smeared with Hongda holy oil, Jason deliberately chose to attack the Tana re-demons who were fighting with other mercenaries from other planes of Bator with their backs to him. While the former paladin slaughtered the demons to open up a path of retreat, he also gathered a number of fortress defenders to help him break out. Under his leadership, this group of people tore apart the vanguard of the Tana re-demons like a sharp knife cutting through cloth. Chapter 81. Jason did not forget about Keys when he led everyone to charge in the opposite direction. After he realized that he had opened up a path of retreat, he even looked back to see if Keys had followed them. After Jason's evil-slaying chop grenade assisted, Keys also took out his high-tech weapon, the wailing double-barreled shotgun. Since entering the lower plane, Keys had not used this weapon much. Although it was not to the extent of being a treasure, how could he improve his skills if he did not practice controlling the gun? People could not always rely on cheats to survive, they had to have real skills. Anyway, with the density of the demons in front of him, there was no danger of missing the target. This was the perfect opportunity to remove his title of Body Tracing Master. The young blue dragon, who had always been full of action, stood slightly on his feet and made a pose commonly used in Western cowboy gladiators. He held the shotgun with one hand and did not need to aim carefully. He just pulled the trigger at the Tana re-demons that rushed towards him. Bang! The shotgun that had been loaded before the battle sprayed out in a fan shape from the muzzle, covering a large number of Dretch that rushed towards him. The silver-plated bullets tore through the bodies of the weak demons, and for a moment, screams could be heard everywhere. This also confirmed the name of Keys's weapon. The double-barreled shotgun could fire twice in a row. The demons that were hit by the bullets in the second wave were relatively more miserable. A lurking Babu demon rogue was discovered by Keys and was shot in the chest. The kinetic energy of the silver-plated bullets was completely released in the flesh of the demon. A huge hole appeared from the front of the demon's chest to the back, and its body also bounced high and fell heavily. "Give me a target and I'll give you back silence." Ignoring the fact that he was just shooting at the demon's face, the young blue dragon proudly recited this long-time favorite line. Of course, although this operation looked fierce and efficient, it did not scare away the demons who were used to seeing blood and limbs. The Tana re-demons could rarely be called warriors, but once they entered the state of battle, their brain would often ignore the fear of death. In the long life of these creatures, there was no lack of experience in responding to the summons and being fortunate enough to wreak havoc in the material plane. Although most of them ended up being killed by heroes, the demons could soon be reborn in the blood pool in the bottomless abyss. That undoubtedly deepened the contempt these creatures had for death. Even if they were now in the abyss, where demons would truly die if they died here. These fellows still attacked the blue dragon youth without fear of death. In desperation, Keyes had to set foot on the path opened by Jason and followed their footsteps and slowly retreated in the direction of the fortress. He figured out how to lure the tyrant worm and its avatar out, but in the encirclement of the demon army, it was still too risky. It was better to be safe than sorry. It was better to use it in a safer stronghold. As time passed, the Tana Re-demons had more stamina than mortals, and their numbers were many times greater than the defenders of the fortress. The situation of the battle was gradually developing in the demons' favor. If one looked down at the entire battlefield from the sky, they would see that the mercenaries from other planes and the demon army as a whole were in a crisscrossing pattern. However, the jagged front where the two came into contact was slowly advancing towards Bator Fortress. There were other mercenaries from other planes like Keyes and Jason who had charged into the enemy's formation, and they gradually began to retreat in groups. Fortunately, the cannons of the fortress were still firing loudly. The powerful Hellscream shells smashed into the sea of Tana Re-demons one after another, creating large waves of broken limbs and blood. Lord Helmet, whom our main character Keyes had been thinking about, was not spared either. The cannons that were bombarding him repeatedly found the avatar of the Demon Lord. Although even fortified bullets wouldn't be able to do anything to a dimensional ruler, it was still quite humiliating for a Demon Lord's incarnation of a dragon to be repeatedly slapped in the face by artillery shells. However, in order to achieve his original intention of directing a good show, the super boss endured the humiliation and slowly advanced step by step. He wanted to wear the shiniest shirt and pretend to be very emotional and personally walk to Bator Fortress to get on his own four-sided platform. However, any demon who saw him embarrass himself was in trouble. They were either directly hit by a mental retardation spell or directly taken away by a hand gesture that caused the parasitic acid worms in their bodies to go berserk. Along the way, there were many more victims of the Tana Re-demons and newborns of the cataclysmic worms. It could be said that a general success was built on thousands of dead bodies. Making a good movie was a waste of effort. Fortunately, hard work paid off. After walking through the artificial isolation zone created by the Hellscream cannons, the great director Helmet walked to the front of the demon army. They were less than a stone's throw away from Bator Fortress, where the mercenaries from other planes relied on the fortress's defensive system to resist the Tana Re-demons. Although Dalton only began to experience a serious military showdown after he went to Hell, he still had a lot of experience. But when he was in Soft Maple City, this Broom Eyebrows boss had experienced a lot of gang battles. Even when he was fighting the Tana Re-demons, he did not forget to observe both sides of the battle. This was a kind of wisdom that came from the streets. There must be a turning point in the battle between two sides. At that time, one side was bound to rise while the other side was bound to fall. He had seen it countless times. The minions of the gangs fought without fear of death, but in the blink of an eye, they suddenly turned around and fled for no reason. It was as if someone had installed a timer in their head. Although the mercenaries from other planes in Bator Fortress had also experienced life-and-death battles before, the situation this time was completely different from the past. This time, so far, there were no powerful monsters like the Baylor, the Apostles of Calamity, or the wolf-snake demons that made people despair. But it was precisely this difference that gave Dalton a bad premonition. He believed in his own eyes. When the demons attacked the fortress, he had already observed the attack pattern of the demon army. There must be a powerful high-grade demon driving it to force the chaotic Tana Re-demons to carry out a slightly organized operation. Otherwise, those guys would not even be able to walk in a straight line. The scale of the demons attacking this time was far greater than before. This was the first time the demons had approached the outer walls of the fortress. Based on the current situation, Dalton estimated that the outermost defensive position would not be able to resist the seemingly tireless and numerous enemies for too long. Then the question came back. Where was the commander behind the demons who could make so many demons launch a continuous attack without fear of death? The answer to his question was an invisible force field giant hand, Bigby's capture palm. As a shadow thief master who hid very well, Dalton's perception was quite sensitive. He only observed a slight distortion in the surrounding light, which allowed him to discover this deadly giant hand. Crouching down and rolling, Broom Eyebrows dodged the capture of the force field giant hand with a standard thief's evasive maneuver. When he dodged and hid behind one of his colleagues with an agility that did not match his body size, he had time to size up the high-level spellcaster who attacked him. That's right, Dalton did not associate Helmet's image with a demon at first glance. This dragon subbody was not conspicuous among the Tana re-demons and was only slightly taller than ordinary people. The mithril silk robe he wore was more in line with the fashion style favored by human mages. At the same time, it revealed a trace of mystery, and at the same time, it announced to the world that I'm rich. But there was no doubt that the guy standing next to Demon Thanner Re was very powerful. The demons around him moved in all directions, as if they were afraid that they would not be able to avoid him. Coupled with the strange-looking calamity bugs behind him, it had to be said that his aura was astonishing. He actually dodged it. Helmet seemed to be surprised that such a mortal could actually dodge his spell and could not help but think. The incarnation of the Demon Lord was somewhat unhappy. He stretched out his right hand and clenched it tightly. As he moved, the force field giant hand that had not yet dissipated slowly turned into a clenched fist, Bigby's Vajra fist. Aiming at the fish that had escaped the net hiding in the fortress's formation, the force field fist flew out. Dalton hurriedly dodged, but the force field fist formed by the magic energy seemed to be equipped with a precision guide. After hitting a few people and becoming an arrow at the end of its flight, it still hit the body of the Shadow Thief Master fiercely. "You're really stubborn." Dalton did not know whether he was talking about the soul-chasing spell or Broom Eyebrows, who was still struggling at death's door after receiving a force field fist that was not inferior to the attack of a battering ram, although it was an arrow at the end of its flight. But one thing was clear. The incarnation of the Demon Lord who cared about face did not intend to let go of his target. Firstly, it was his stubborn personality. Secondly, he did not want Dalton to rely on the experience of escaping from his hands to go around the world and ruin himself. On the other hand, although the Shadow Thief Master was indeed hit by the Bigby's Vajra fist, he was not seriously injured because of his own profession's ability to dodge. Using the reaction force of the Vajra fist, this guy even widened the distance between him and the dangerous dragon subbody. Of course, the incarnation of the Demon Lord was not going to let him go. Not only did he personally chase after him, but he also ordered his own kin to join in the pursuit. Under the command of the dragon's subbody, the newborn cataclysm bugs rushed out of the battle line that was gradually straightening. The turning point that Dalton had been waiting for a long time finally appeared. As he wished, he reached a safer place before the weakened side retreated. But he certainly did not expect that the minion who suddenly turned around and fled was actually himself. Of course, Broom Eyebrows, turn around and flee, was certainly different from the street gangsters. Generally, street gangsters would not be chased by multiple high-level demons while fleeing for their lives. In the face of the relentless pursuit of the disaster bugs, Dalton wisely chose to retreat with the other defenders instead of just covering his head and fleeing like a rat. An arrow shot from the side behind directly sank into the body of a disaster bug. Dalton's archer brothers tried to kill these high-leveled acid mist worms, but the results were minimal. Even if the purple robe wooden bow in his hand was of superior quality, it still couldn't give off the feeling of shooting an RPG with a bow as described in some novels. But what he could not do did not mean that others could not do it. A broad-bladed dagger slashed diagonally from the bottom left to the top right, cutting the target in half like a hot knife through butter. The white flames burning on the wound offset the demon's innate regenerative ability, and just like that, it ended the life of the calamity swarm closest to Dalton. As a former sacred samurai who was in the extreme opposite camp, he used a weapon that was not only tempered with silver but also smeared with Honda holy oil and used the evil slashing slash to deal with a Thanner re-demon. Chapter 82. Jensen used his own blade to repay the people who had helped him in the past. After calming down the guilt in his heart, his faith was sublimated, which also made his attacks full of holy power sharper. The demons of Tana Ri, who used to be a paladin, were no match for him. However, it was easy to be punished if one was too strong. Helmuter noticed this foreign mercenary warrior who was on a killing spree. A paladin who worships the good side of order? How could such a guy appear in the barracks of the 9 prisons of Bader? Is it possible that the Batsu Devil's recruitment advertisements have reached all the way to Mountain Paradise? The dragon's avatar could not help but be surprised. As the incarnation of a homebody demon lord who had never walked out of the bottomless abyss, Hemtar was naturally not very knowledgeable. Therefore, he did not understand how much effort the demon Batsu had put in to recruit enough blood mercenaries from other dimensions. Of course, this lack of knowledge did not affect the strength and cunning of this monster. Helmuter was not angry when he saw the paladin wantonly slaughtering the new family members he had just transformed not long ago. Instead, he felt that using such a rare opponent as a trailer for his work was actually a somewhat surprising and wonderful idea. When Jensen swung his sword to cut down another swarm of calamity worms, something unexpected happened. The two halves of the demon's body suddenly exploded, and thousands of acidic worms burst out like popcorn out of a pot. In an instant, they swept towards the paladin who was still on a killing spree. "Be careful," Dalton of the Broom's Broom Brow Gang warned loudly. At the same time, the Shadow Thief Master no longer deliberately hid his strength. His figure suddenly flashed and jumped into the shadow under his feet. This move was much better than the Babu demon assassins in the demon army. When he appeared again, he directly jumped out from Jensen's shadow. Shadow Strike, Skynet Loose Hands. Dalton's fists, which were wearing spiked gloves, turned into a sky full of fist shadows, shrouding the massive amount of worms that were gushing towards him. He had practiced this skill to the point where he could use it with ease. It helped Jason block part of the explosion of the calamity bugs without hurting the former Saint Samurai who were buried by the acid mist worms. In the face of the sudden explosion, Jensen had indeed fallen into a passive situation. Fortunately, Broom Eyebrow's timely rescue gave the experienced warrior a moment of respite. He quickly adjusted his rhythm. First, he used his Sacred Bruise ability to convert the additional damage caused by the acid worms into bruises that did not affect his movement. Then, he immediately used his holy power to heal the bruises. Even so, it was difficult to avoid physical pain, but at least his combat strength would not decrease too much. "Can you still fight?" Broom Eyebrows asked without looking at Jason. His attention was focused on Helmthal, who was walking towards him. "Don't think too much, kid. I didn't save you on purpose. It's just that this matter is really difficult to deal with. I might need your help to deal with it." After hearing Dalton's words, the former Saint Samurai did not say much. He just shook his arm, which was still a little sore, and then silently walked to the gang leader's side and stood still. The tip of the wide-bladed short sword in his hand was slanted towards the ground. He made a Saint Samurai sword stance that could only be grasped after a lot of practice. The stalemate was broken by 3 long arrows thrown from the sky. Dalton's bow-wielding lackey had some foundation as a ranger. When he retreated, he easily climbed up the outer wall of Bator Fortress. When he saw that his boss and Jensen, who had helped him before, were facing the same enemy, He did not think twice and pulled out arrows to provide long-range support. 3 consecutive arrows were shot towards the enemy in the distance in a triangular formation. However, what was unexpected was that the enemy did not act like a regular spellcaster and use conventional spells such as Protective Arrow to block the long-range sneak attack. As the incarnation of the Demon Lord, although Helmtar was not a melee expert, he was definitely not a weakling. He just grabbed an arrow shaft in the air and gently fiddled with it. The other 2 arrows also deviated and fell to the ground. Then he threw the arrow in his hand forward. This arrow that was thrown casually was surrounded by crackling electric arcs. At first glance, one could tell that it was not easy to deal with. Dalton and Jensen did not intend to take it head-on. But just as they were about to dodge, another spell followed. Command, Intimidate. Readers who have read the previous chapter would surely remember that even the powerful Batsusphere demons could not completely avoid the influence of this command spell. It was not hard to imagine how bad the situation was for Dalton and Jensen at this time. Shadow Meld, Shadow Meld. At the last moment, Broom Eyebrows was a little more skillful and recovered from the influence of the spell first. Then, this master of shadow thieves instantly used his special skill of Shadow Meld and used 2 gloves to catch the arrow that Helmtar shot at him. When he reappeared, Dalton had already used Shadow Meld to appear behind the enemy. Without any hesitation, he stabbed the arrow with crackling electric arcs into the back of the enemy, who seemed to be a high-grade spellcaster. But it was just an illusion. "Oh no, we fell into a trap!" Dalton immediately reacted, but it was too late. Helmtar's scale-covered claws reached out from his wide sleeves and pierced through Broom Eyebrow's body. Jensen would never forget the scene that unfolded in front of him. This sinister-looking mafia boss had his body pierced through by a demon's sharp claws. His blood mixed with his internal organs turned into brown vomit as it gushed out of his mouth. "Don't worry about me, just go." This was the last thing Jensen read from his mouth. The last thing he did was to muster up his remaining strength and use the spiked gloves to strike the demon's claws that extended from his chest. This action triggered the special effect of the enchanted weapon. Driven by the spell, the 2 fists were like hydraulic presses, smashing the demon lord's palms into a bloody mess. Had Helmtar ever been injured like this before? It was no joke that the 5 fingers were connected to the heart. In an instant, a sharp pain surged into his eyes. Anger rose from his heart, and the evil demon's sub-body pierced his other arm into Dalton's back. Under the force of the 2 arms, the underworld boss who once commanded Soft Maple City was torn in half like a rag. "You really deserve to die." This was the first sentence Jensen said after breaking the maxim of silence that he had always adhered to. Chapter 83. Seeing Dalton die tragically in front of him, the former Saint Samurai was not only angry but also inexplicably sad. The word revenge was deeply imprinted in Jensen's heart like blood in his eyes. In order to get more power, he personally broke the silent proverb that he had been practicing for a long time. This would bring a temporary increase in power, but the price was that Jason, who worshipped the god of justice and law, would violate the agreement of the law and might lose the god's attention forever. But so what? Didn't Jason, the former Saint Samurai, commit the crime of murder because of the morality in his heart and lost the glory of the exemplary path? Even though I have died 9 times, I have never regretted my actions. He had to defend what he believed in with his life, because it was more important than life, more precious than honor, because it was the path in the heart of the Saint Samurai. He had to let the world know that good and evil would be rewarded in the end. As the incarnation of the Demon Lord, Helmtar did not care about the blood on his hand. He just flicked it gently and then used magic to repair the wound on his palm caused by Dalton's dying blow. After removing the seal of the silent proverb, there was no dazzling light, but Jason's body began to swell and slightly propped up the gray robe on his body. Only by observing carefully could one see the characteristics of the most powerful group of heaven warriors, from the weak light rippling out of his body and the changes in his snow-white eyes. "Oh, it seems that something extraordinary has happened." Hemtar looked at the Saint Samurai in front of him, who seemed to be angered by his actions and triggered some of the characteristics of the heavenly creatures in his blood. He could not help but be slightly surprised. "Thou shalt be hated by the mysterious." In this world, language itself was a kind of power. When this sentence was said with the holy language of creation that he was not proficient in, the world changed because of it. Although others did not feel anything strange, Hemtar, as the person involved, clearly felt that there seemed to be a kind of shackle composed of karma quietly but inevitably entangled his fate. "What did you do?" In shock and anger, the dragon's sub-body, which was still calm just now, instantly exploded. "Order, death!" But as soon as the incantation left his mouth, he felt that something was wrong. As a spellmaster, he was very sure that the spell model he had constructed was accurate, but the moment the spell was activated, the model collapsed instantly, causing the spell's effect to be greatly reduced. Originally, a top-tier enchantment like Order, Death could only be resisted by a mortal with their total HP. There was no effective way to nullify it. But after being hit by this greatly reduced version of the spell, the paladin in front of him only seemed to frown in pain, and then continued to attack with his sword. How could this not be a huge mistake? The reason for all these variables was because of the language that Johnson had just used. The so-called creation language was actually a fragment of a lost language. Some scholars believed that it was the predecessor of the heavenly realm language. Very few mortals knew one or two of their word. Their power was so great that no mortal mind could understand more than one or two sentences. In this language, there were no evil words such as pain, despair, hatred, and betrayal. The word disgust, that Johnson knew, was probably one of the most negative words in this language. But Johnson was only a mortal after all. Even if he used the creation language, the curse of the demon lord incarnation, being discussed by the mysterious, was only partially realized. As the incarnation of the tyrant worm, the dragon's sub-body, Helmuter, had the ability of a warlock while being a mage. Although there was a problem with the construction of the spell model, it did not mean that he could not fight back. Compared to mages, warlocks relied more on the power of their bloodline to cast spells. It was similar to the spell-like abilities of the lower realms demons. Although there were not as many types of spells as mages, warlocks of the same level could use more spells than mages. And with the tyrant worm's main body supporting him, Helmuter naturally did not have to worry about the lack of warlock spells. It was just that most of the spells he could use now were evoking spells. Prismatic Spray. The dragon's sub-body, who was no longer in the mood to continue fighting, flipped its palm and a cone-shaped beam of light formed by 7 colors suddenly shot out and enveloped Johnson, who was rushing over with his sword. The effects of this high-level evoking spell were very random. If one was lucky, it would be like being shown by a flashlight. If one was unlucky, the damage would be reduced according to the 7 colors of light. There was no doubt that the former sacred samurai often did good deeds, and good deeds would be rewarded with good deeds. This was a deeply hidden law of order in this world. The lucky Johnson only triggered one disease debuff. After breaking the silent dictum, for half an hourglass, the God's blessing effect happened to be able to reduce the damage caused by the disease. Therefore, this vengeful warrior dashed out of the spell's area of effect without suffering any real damage. When the holy power poured into the wide short sword in his hand, the Hongda holy oil that was smeared on the blade was completely ignited. The flame made all the good people feel warm and made all the evil people feel terrified. Johnson swung his sword at the demon in front of him with an unstoppable momentum. Under the influence of the flame of vengeance, the blade suddenly became a little tighter. Most of the righteous people were the butchers. Except for Johnson, who was close at hand, Dalton's subordinates did not scatter after seeing their boss's tragic death. All of a sudden, Himuter became the target of everyone. He had to face the burning sword hanging above his head that constantly challenged his chaotic and evil nature. He also had to be on guard against the sneak attacks of his minions from all directions. In addition, he had no idea how to remove the influence of the holy word of creation on his spellcasting ability. The various encounters that he had encountered had driven the leader of the demons crazy. He even wanted to immediately summon the main body of the tyrant worm that was often in a dormant state to prepare for the apotheosis, and break out of the ground to end everything in front of him. Bear with it. After all, the strange megalosaurus at the core of this fortress has not appeared yet. Helmuter tried to use reason to suppress his rage. For any demon, this was indeed a big challenge. But these ants really deserve to die. The furious demon lord directly used his claws to catch Johnson's short sword. The sharp blade cut his palm, and the holy flame on it was slightly weakened due to the contamination of the demon's blood. But just as he was about to smash the weapon into pieces, the holy flame on the sword suddenly soared. Just like what Johnson did when he broke Keyes's weapon, the weapon exploded into pieces that covered Helmuter's entire upper body. Sword attack. Worship kindness and destroy evil. As soon as the short sword was caught, Johnson bent one of his knees and squatted down. At this moment, he just happened to dodge the flying sword fragment. Not only that, he did not stop attacking even though he was barehanded. From bottom to top, Johnson's strength went from his heel to his fist. Using the momentum of the bow, Johnson landed a heavy punch on Helmuter's lower abdomen. Fist of Heaven. P.S. Note 1. Prismatic Spray in D&D is a 7th level evocation type spell, and Colorful Spray is a 1st level illusion type spell. Because of the Chinese translation, it is easy to confuse. Just a simple explanation, it will not affect the reading. Chapter 84. Fist of Heaven was a powerful bare-handed attack technique that was triggered by a sacred samurai who had practiced the Fist of Shock and Awe by infusing it with holy energy. Jason, who was once blessed by the gods, persevered for decades under the guidance of the belief of upholding justice and combating evil. At this moment, his ability bloomed magnificently in the bottomless abyss. If the splashing power of Chongshan in the explosion of the broadsword was a great threat, then this close-range attack of the Fist of Heaven was a crisis. Even with the strength of the Demon Lord's incarnation, Hemtar was still sent flying a few feet off the ground by the strange force, and a large part of the tyrant worm's tongue that was connected to his legs was dragged out. Not only that, the Fist of Heaven's holy deterrence directly penetrated his natural resistance, and the dragon's sub-body fell into a state of slight sluggishness due to the deterrence. On the battlefield, such a moment of sluggishness was fatal. The spinning hatchet and the arrows shot by the archers hit their targets one after another. Originally, this scene would never have happened under the protection of the magic shield, but the sound of the hatchet tearing the mithril silk robe and the sound of the arrow piercing the flesh was the most realistic reflection of the absurd fact that these mortals had actually hurt the incarnation of a demon lord. Demons never regarded one-on-one combat as a kind of heroism. In fact, they rarely praised this kind of behavior, which was often praised by many other races. What's more, the situation now was a group of people fighting against their own boss. The cataclysmic bugs that were originally scattered not far away from the dragon's sub-body swarmed up and attacked Jensen and the other participants in the fight as if they had been injected with chicken blood. Although there were no powerful first-generation bodies like the ones in the army of the tyrannical gods, these newborn cataclysmic worms still brazenly used some of their spell-like abilities or directly went up to fight at close range. Acid fog, poisonous flames, and shrieking acid worms played the prelude to the destruction of the Broom Eyebrows gang. These guys did not have Jason's divine protection ability to protect them. Even if they were super fighters who could take down a dozen double flower red sticks in a street brawl, they were no better than lambs in front of the frenzied Tana-Re demons. It should be noted that the demons of Tana-Re had never been afraid of anyone when it came to ganging up. Even the Batsu Devil, who had a strong overall strength and was known for its strict order, could only fight on par with the ultimate villains of the bottomless abyss in the big data statistics of local battles. Demons had always been the ones ganging up on others. Very few creatures had the ability to gang up on demons. Moreover, this was their own territory. Of course, this was only for the calamity bugs. The other Tana-Re demons living in this plane hated these parasites that were everywhere in the acid fog canyon. Protect him! Protect the Emperor! Purge the Emperor's concubines! Yep, in the end, this acid mist worm was quickly devoured by its fellow calamity worms due to its rather inappropriate behavior. The calamity bugs were inexplicably excited. The calamity bugs were all over the calamity bugs' bodies, and the calamity bugs were constantly muttering neurotic words. This was actually a psychological tactic used by the calamity bug. Their opponents had to passively accept the test of focus. If they were not careful and distracted, the calamity bugs would easily take advantage of the situation. Perhaps it was a spell-like attack, or perhaps it was a choke bite from the calamity bugs. The calamity bugs would always use different methods to reap the lives of their opponent. Therefore, it was very difficult to figure out a pattern when fighting against them. Ordinary warriors could only rely on speed and brute force to deal with the calamity bugs so that the calamity bugs would not be able to react in time, or even if they did react, they would not be able to resist. Jason had wanted to continue attacking Hemtar, who had fallen into a state of fear, but the calamity bugs that were harassing him forced him to be careful. He also did not want to give up on his allies who were being slaughtered by the calamity bug. Revenge for one person or let more people live. If he chose the latter, he must immediately protect these people and retreat. But maybe after he retreated, he would completely lose the favor of the gods and become a slightly stronger ordinary person. Maybe he would die in the abyss. Maybe he would lose the last chance to seek justice for the familiar stranger. Maybe Jason suddenly thought of the words that Dalton, who was torn in half, had mouthed to him before he died, "Don't worry about me. Go." He instantly made up his mind and used all his strength to rush to the strangers who were being attacked by the calamity bugs. After rescuing them, he said to the calamity bugs, "Don't worry about me. Go." Peace of mind was where he belonged. In the past, just now, and now, this saint samurai had never betrayed his belief. "Don't even think about leaving." To the saint samurai's slight surprise, Hemtar, who had fallen into a state of fear, actually recovered so quickly. This demon lord's avatar did not care about the torn robe on his body, nor did he care about the arrows and flying axes embedded in his body. As soon as he woke up, he roared loudly in the language of the abyss. However, just like all the villain's declarations in the book, Helmut Hell only shouted out one sentence, leaving behind a large number of curses that were blocked before they could leave his mouth. "Finally found you, guy. Railgun." As a privilege given by the author to the protagonist, the young blue dragon was always able to shine at the crucial moment. Originally, Keyes had planned to use a strategy to lure this demon lord's avatar out, but on the way back to the fortress, he saw the Saint Samurai Jason fighting a swarm of calamity bugs. There was a 99% chance that someone who could command such a large number of high-level calamity bugs was the target Keyes was looking for. It was really a case of traveling far and wide in search of something, only to find it without any effort. Without thinking too much, the young blue dragon instantly used the fine gold scythe in his hand as a cannonball. Using the instantaneous formation of a super-strong electromagnetic field, he launched it at the most beautiful child, wearing very avant-garde clothes, the dragon's secondary body, Hemtar. The supersonic scythe cannonball fired at such a close distance was impossible to dodge. Moreover, as the target, Hemtar, had just recovered from the Saint Samurai's attack, and was still a little dizzy. In this way, the railgun hit this semi-fixed target without any suspense. I knew I was not a master of body sketching. Facing the demon lord's avatar that was blown away by the bombardment, the young blue dragon remembered the teachings. It is better to be courageous than courageous to pursue a desperate enemy. Don't learn from an overlord for the sake of fame. 3 steps in 2, Quest quickly caught up to him. At the same time, he dispelled the spell's mimicry effect while running. The young blue dragon, who was no less than an adult megalosaurus, rose from the ground and leaped into the sky. The shadow of the dragon's wings covered the army of demons. The gaps of its indigo scales reflected the light of the underground volcano and flashed with golden light. Its eyes were like molten gold as it locked onto the target that had just been blown away by the railgun. Its 2 hearts stirred with surging power at the same time. Chapter 85. With the previous experience, the young blue dragon's double breath was quickly formed. The blazing dragon flames and the cone-shaped weakening gas hit Hemtar at the same time, who had just been hit by the railgun. The mithril silk robe on his body, which had been reduced to rags, was completely reduced to ashes. Keys, who had transplanted the golden dragon's heart, seemed to have inherited the megalosaurus's talent of luck. Coupled with the follow-up effect of the paladin's word of creation, the demon lord's avatar could not withstand the test of the weakening breath. His weakened body did not have any effective defensive means before it was directly hit by the dragon flame. By the time it landed on the ground, it was already charred on the outside and tender on the inside. Kill that megalosaurus! The cataclysmic worms on the ground burst into a loud cry, which was rare for them. When they saw the tragic scene of the dragon avatar being ambushed, they were all furious. Not only did they launch the attack themselves, but they also ordered the rest of the Thanner army to join in the crusade against Keys. The young blue dragon soaring in the sky was naturally not afraid of the enemy's counterattack. In the face of a large number of demons, he did not have time to think, nor was he willing to passively defend. After a slight adjustment, Quest used his specialty of using offense as a form of defense. Magnetic release. Keys's mass railgun. The silver-containing armor-piercing electromagnetic cannonballs tore through the slightly green air of the acid fog canyon with amazing kinetic energy, hitting those who dared to offend the dignity of the megalosaurus head-on. Few demons could ignore such a fierce physical attack. Most of them fell to the ground with serious injuries after taking just one hit from the young blue dragon's railgun. A few unlucky ones were hit in the head and other vital parts and died directly. With just this one hit, a huge vacuum appeared in the vanguard of the demon army. Just as Keys was about to follow up with another attack, he suddenly had an epiphany. The young blue dragon flapped his wings and quickly rose to the skies above the mercenary fortress in Bartho. The mouth of a giant beast broke out of the cracked soil of the acid fog canyon and bit down. The jagged fangs of the giant mouth were even slightly higher than where Keys had been hovering. The heavily injured incarnation of the demon lord no longer fantasized about his exaggerated dream. He brazenly awakened the half-asleep tyrant worm. The repeated humiliation from the mortals had infuriated him. After awakening his body, Hemtar, who was already physically and mentally exhausted, seemed to have been plugged into a power bank to prolong his life. The muscles all over his body swelled up like a balloon, and the original wounds on his body healed at a speed visible to the naked eye under the nourishment of the powerful vitality. The tyrant worm's kiss, which was supposed to bloom in the center of Bartho, appeared in advance outside the fortress defense line. It had to be said that the demon lord's mouth was really extraordinary. It had the same effect of clearing out the battlefield as Keys's railgun, or even better. Everything within a few hundred meters, whether it was the vanguard of the demon army or the defenders of Bartho, was suddenly stuffed into the monster's giant mouth full of fangs. In fact, for a creature like the tyrant worm that was even more astonishing than the titans, it was difficult to rely solely on physical strength to support its overly large body. It could only move freely with the help of magical energy. Megalosaurus, as an excellent magical creature, were naturally very sensitive to magical energy fluctuations. It was because of this that the young blue dragon was able to sense the magical energy fluctuations that the tyrant worm released when it was ready to attack, and thus escaped the disaster. Young Megalosaurus. After the tyrant worm was awakened, Hemtar, who was originally an independent personality, would be greatly affected. At this time, he would often indulge in his primal instinct to devour everything. It's crunchy. It must be delicious. As the tyrant worm's tongue stuck out from the gap between its fangs and licked its mouth greedily, the dragon's body that grew on the tip of the tongue quickly spiraled up in the air. Hemtar's clothes had long turned into ashes and were blown away by the wind. At this time, the true appearance of the demon lord, who was originally hidden under the hooded mithril silk robe, could be clearly seen. This guy's body was covered with thick green acidic saliva secreted by the tyrant worm's tongue. Only the limbs that were not covered by the saliva exposed the scales on the surface of the Megalosaurus. His head was somewhat similar to that of a kobold, but much larger. At this time, because of the influence of the tyrant worm's consciousness, Hemtar's originally pale and lifeless eyes revealed a terrifying crimson light. Super electromagnetic gun. Bigby crushing palm. One after another, Keys and Hemtar used their best attacks one after another. The electromagnetic accelerator cannonball and the force field giant palm collided heavily. It was like a silver bottle breaking, but a violent scene appeared above bot or fortress. Large pieces of cannonball like bursting water splashed everywhere, and the one that broke the silver bottle was the force field giant palm that rose from the bottom. After all, it was different with the power bank. Even at this time, Hemtar still could not get rid of the influence of the word of creation that followed him like a shadow. But with the power transferred from his body, he could actually cast a top level 9 evocation spell with a wave of his hand. That's right, compared to the Bigby's capture palm and Bigby's Vajra fist that he had used before, this Bigby's crushing palm was the true trump card of this series of force field spells. Its might was naturally incomparable. Even if he could not use supreme magic skills, such as spell maximization, due to the control obstacle, Hemtar's spell still successfully went through Keys's super electromagnetic gun head-on. The force field giant palm that shattered the cannonball continued to attack the young blue dragon hovering in the sky. The demon lord was so terrifying. If he had kept a low profile for hundreds of years like those mutant dragons whose names shook the world, Keys might have allowed this spell to hit him. But our protagonist was now just a young blue dragon. He was still a child. Even if he was about the same size as an adult Megalosaurus, he did not have the slightest dangerous thought of testing the law. Moscow doesn't believe in tears, and the bottomless abyss doesn't care about age. Keys muttered helplessly, but he still quickly cast a high-level teleportation spell to teleport himself to a safe place to avoid the attack of the force field giant palm. Then, he continued to think of ways to deal with Hemtar. The young blue dragon did not have the intention to fight with the demon lord's incarnation. He was just waiting for a signal. But Hemtar, who was fighting with him, had turned into a dogskin plaster under the subconscious effect of the tyrant worm's dragon-eating habit. Fortunately, although the spells used were extremely dangerous, most of them did not cause great damage to Keys's dragon body. The tyrant worm had a preference for devouring a complete Megalosaurus. Except for the Bigby's crushing palm at the beginning, he rarely used powerful evocation spells. Instead, he used a lot of enchantment spells that leaned towards control. Under the influence of the word of creation, this kind of spell, which tested the ability to control spells, was greatly reduced in power in his hands. So Keyes was able to slowly deal with him and try to drag the battle into garbage time. Although the tyrant worm's shocking bite had swallowed a lot of the demon army's vanguard troops, it had indeed pulled the battle into a straight line and opened a gap in the stalemate. A large number of Tanner re-demons had successfully broken through this gap, and some of the most vigorous and brave demons had even reached the outer walls of Bator Fortress. On the other hand, although the otherworldly mercenaries in Bator Fortress had activated a large number of consumable facilities, including the cloud-burning spell, Pseudo, the endless stream of demons, under the encouragement and threat of the Demon Lord's arrival, had broken through these fortress-level defensive traps bit by bit despite the heavy casualties. Since the cannons in Bator Fortress had been firing at full capacity for more than an hourglass, the enhanced cannonballs that were filled with silver powder had been used up. Only a small number of silver-plated cannonballs and ordinary cannonballs were left to support the defenders. Although the barb demons responsible for firing the cannons were not afraid of the high temperature emitted by the cannons, from time to time, the cannons would explode due to the lack of cooling down, causing a lot of chaos. It was only under the strong suppression of the bone demon gendarmes in charge of supervising the battle that there were no more major mistakes. The giant ogre Neru and mechanical golem number 21, who were originally responsible for guarding the gap in the fortress's defenses, had given up on defending this place after more gaps appeared in other places. They had come to the second layer of the defensive wall to receive and organize the retreating defenders to enter in an orderly manner and fill in the new positions in time. Damn it, this guy is getting more and more difficult to deal with. Is it done or not? The tyrant worm gradually lost its patience in front of a prey that had not been taken down for a long time. Hemtar, who was fighting Keyes, gradually began to use powerful evocation spells to attack. And according to the young blue dragon's observation, the tyrant worm that was still sticking its head out was also getting restless, as if it wanted to personally take care of him. Chapter 86. As the signal had yet to appear, Keyes was caught in a dilemma. He could only grit his teeth and decide to hold on for a while longer. I hope it'll be quick. If the Demon Lord really comes down personally, then the best strategy is to run, the young blue dragon thought to himself as he dodged Hemtar's offensive spells. Similar to the situation of its commander, the mercenary fortress of Bartho was also in a precarious situation under the onslaught of the demon army. The outermost defensive line of the fortress was about to be completely lost. The consumable defensive facilities like cloud-burning, Pseudo, that were originally attached to it had all gone out of action. Those who were lucky enough to survive had already retreated to the back of the second wall to organize the defense. After more than 2 hourglasses of fierce battle, most of the mercenaries from the other planes were close to the limit of their physical strength. They no longer took the initiative to attack and defend against the enemy outside the fortress like before. Those who flinch will be executed. The giant ogre Neru waved his weapon and executed a soldier who had been scared out of his wits by the Thanner re-demons. Such executions were taking place in many places within the fortress. This was the most important job of the supervision team formed by the bone demons and barb demons. At this time, only the Batsu devil soldiers could still maintain their fighting spirit against the Thanner re-demons due to their nature. The only situation that could be considered favorable was that other than the artillery positions that the barb demons were in charge of, the long-range troops that had not participated in the battle earlier began to show their might. The spellcaster troops began to release a large number of lethal battlefield spells that had been prepared for a long time. The barb demons equipped with hellish crossbows and the crossbowmen extracted from the mercenaries from the other planes also began to rain arrows on the Thanner re-demons. It was funny to say that the Thanner re-demons were like bulls attracted by a handful of fodder. Wave after wave, they poured into the huge slaughterhouse that was Bartho. But the mercenaries from the other planes were not as relaxed as us who were reading books. They still had the time to daydream. The mercenaries from the other planes, who had gradually stabilized after being suppressed, were now desperately sniping at the enemy in the face of the threat of the destruction of the fortress. Dark clouds pressed down on the city, threatening to destroy it. The raging waves formed by the demons of the bottomless abyss kept slamming into the mercenary fortress from Bartho. For a time, everyone was in danger, and our main character, Keys, was also slowly falling into a bitter struggle. Hemtar had completely given up on capturing the young megalosaurus alive. All kinds of astonishing spells were thrown at the young blue dragon hovering in the sky as if they were free. Not good, that fiend overlord is making a move. Keys, who didn't dare to recklessly face the enemy and could only rely on his mobility to engage in guerrilla warfare, suddenly felt an astonishing spell fluctuation. It was exactly the same feeling he felt before the giant beast broke out of the ground. Before he could react, a huge suction force locked onto the blue dragon's body that was still flying. The tyrant worm's huge mouth that was full of fangs aimed at the young blue dragon and sucked in a deep breath. When it rains, it pours. The fiend overlord's incarnation, Hemtar, took advantage of the moment when Keys's body was unstable and successfully cast a dimensional anchor on the young blue dragon. Keys, who couldn't use greater teleportation, flapped his dragon wings with all his might. He knew that if he was pulled to a low altitude by the suction force, he would have to face the fiend overlord directly. If that happened, there would be no chance of survival. Under the stimulation of a life-and-death crisis, the young blue dragon gathered all the remaining energy in his body at a speed far faster than before. The triple megalosaurus breath, which contained the golden dragon's dragon flames, weakening gas, and even a powerful electromagnetic field to activate the super railgun, was shot at the tyrant worm's huge mouth with a narrow band of kinetic energy converted from potential energy. The recoil from this unprecedented breath counteracted the huge suction force that was pulling Keys. The young blue dragon didn't even have time to care about the damage caused by the breath. He rushed in the direction of the mercenary fortress from Bartho. "You can't run!" Hemtar roared loudly. As a high-grade spellcaster, the incarnation of the fiend overlord seemed to want to use this method to sweep away all the grievances that he had suffered before. However, the bold words that he had just said were like a glass cup that fell from the table and was smashed into pieces by a black hand that emerged from a dark corner. Snyder, who had been hiding for a long time, controlled the terrifying armor that was used as a temporary body to launch a sneak attack on the dragon's subbody. This former legendary lich, who was now a half-lich wizard, was naturally very familiar with the art of attacking from behind, because he was born as a drow. Coupled with more than 300 years of diligent study on the dragon's subbody and the maggot attached to it, no one knew better than him how to inflict more damage on this old enemy of his. Species targeted strong immobilization, withering touch, Snyder's worm specimen making spell, wax amber seal. These were the sequences of spells that were preset in advance. Once the terrifying armor touched Hemtar, the dragon's subbody that grew on the tip of the tyrant worm's tongue lost part of its vitality due to a large amount of dehydration in an instant. Then, with the help of the sealing spell that blocked the energy transmission from the fiend overlord, the damage was amplified. To be fair, even if Snyder had not degenerated into a half-lich, he was no match for the incarnation of the fiend overlord in a one-on-one fight. At the very least, this sequence of spells that could cause great damage to the opponent had to be activated through contact, which he could not do by himself. It was just that Keys had successfully attracted the attention of the fiend overlord, which gave him the opportunity to strike. After the successful strike, the half-lich did not linger. He waved his hand that was slightly corroded by the acidic saliva of the tyrant worm on Hemtar's body, and immediately activated advanced teleportation to leave this troublesome place. Unlike Snyder's graceful departure, the tyrant worm felt as if it had accidentally bitten its tongue while speaking. However, the pain was much more intense and drove the tyrant worm into a frenzy. Had it not been for the exhaustion of preparing for the apotheosis and the discomfort of traveling through the soil of Avernus, the tyrant worm would have completely awakened and destroyed everything in front of it. When the time comes, the power of heaven and earth works together. When the time comes, the hero is not free. Just as the behemoth was channeling more power to its dragon subbody to heal its wounds, a sacred radiance burst out from its body in an instant. A fist that carried the power of kindness and vanquishing evil forcefully broke through the tyrant worm's skin that was tougher than steel, and a mortal figure leaped out of the demon lord's body. The continuous pain made the tyrant worm involuntarily stop trying to save its incarnation. It did not even have time to chase after the ant that had hurt it. The power of Chongshan Xie not only opened a channel in its body, but also turned into an extremely stubborn toxin that constantly offset the large amount of energy released by the fiend overlord to heal itself. As a result, more of the creatures that had been swallowed but had not been digested escaped through the escape channel. The one who performed the surgery on the tyrant worm was none other than Jason, who had suddenly broken out of the soil and swallowed it. Chapter 87. Surrounded by the endless darkness and the feeling of falling, Jensen was swallowed by the tyrant worm. Only the terrified screams of the fortress guards and the Thanner re-demons could penetrate the void and reach Jensen's ears. But this calming sound did not last long. It only took a moment for all the devoured creatures to be caught by the tentacles on the tyrant worm's cavity. They did not fall directly into the monster's stomach and be baptized by the acid as expected. The tyrant worm's size determined that it did not have a digestive system like a normal creature. Its inner cavity was densely packed with trapping arms that could disassemble and divide the food into different cavities to slowly absorb nutrients. At the same time, the cavities had spatial characteristics that could often contain food several times its volume. This was the tyrant worm's highly efficient digestion mode after drinking its special drink. But it was precisely because of this that Jensen had the chance to escape. Being tightly wrapped in the tyrant worm's digestive cavity, he was immune to diseases and toxins due to the God's blessing status. He was not affected by the digestive fluid secreted with anesthetic. Still conscious, Jensen used his holy power to resist the corrosion of the tyrant worm's digestive fluid while silently gathering all the power in his body. Hard work paid off. After reminding himself for the 999th time to persevere, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity finally came. Due to the deep breath he used on Quith and the subsequent transfer of power to Hemtar to speed up the recovery of the dragon's subbody, the continuous consumption had slightly affected the tyrant worm's digestion process. 10 times Fist of Heaven. Jensen's iron fist, which gathered all the strength in his body and the rich power of the tyrant worm, hit the inner wall of the tyrant worm's digestive cavity one after another. From the inside to the outside, the paladin used his fist to open a path in the tyrant worm's body. This action not only allowed him to escape, but also allowed some creatures that had not been digested to escape. A bunch of fireworks rose from the Bartholomew fortress. This was the signal that the fortress commander Keyes had been waiting for, the signal to retreat. Retreat! Retreat quickly! Gather at the center of the stronghold! Na Lu, Mechanical Man No. 21, and the Batsu military police, who had also received Keyes' advice, began a new evacuation. The spellcasters quickly cast their spells according to the method taught by Snade. Activate Construct Life, Lava, Greater Phantom Slayer, Greater Illusion. A series of spells mainly of the transmutation and illusion type were cast by the spellcasters through a combination of spells that were of a higher level. The purpose of these spells was to delay the demon army for a moment, so that the defenders of the stronghold would have enough time to retreat. Inside the Bartholomew mercenary fortress, in the wartime medical camp below the battle command room, an underground passage that was guarded by the elite bone devils sent by Blue the Ogre Gourmet had been opened. Under the organization of the Devils of Bartholomew, the defenders of the fortress who had survived hundreds of battles quickly retreated into the passage. It turned out that Keyes had already predicted that the Bartholomew fortress would fall under the siege of the demon army after being airdropped into the acid fog canyon. His original plan was to follow the great leader's guiding principle of, if the bottom is lost, everyone will lose. If the bottom is lost, everyone will be lost. If the bottom is lost, everyone will be lost. If the bottom is lost, everyone will be lost. However, with the addition of the Demolic, Sneyd, he had a more reliable solution. He was secretly plotting against the demon army. The half-golems who were in charge of the security of the goblin noble, Riknaz, were all involved in the excavation work. In addition, the Blue Dragon was an expert in earthwork. Under the guidance of Keyes, an underground passage leading to Sneyd's laboratory was completed in a few days. At the same time, the construction of the Hell Gate fortress was nearing completion in the Demolica's lair. The cheap demons, bloat demons, that had been airdropped into the fortress as magic materials had all been used up. The Demolic had personally set up a spell concealment array that effectively prevented anyone from investigating the fortress. Even the acid fog worms that were spread all over the plain were unable to do so. As the defenders of the fortress retreated, the demon army gradually resolved the interference set up by the spellcasters. Outside the fortress, the tyrant worm had finally used its filthy abyssal power to destroy the power left behind by the holy samurai. This demon lord, who had been injured both physically and mentally, rammed into the walls of the Bartholomew fortress with all its remaining strength. A single blow had caused an effect that even Helmeter's meteor blast had not been able to achieve. Most of the outermost walls of the fortress had collapsed, leaving only a few remnants. This demon lord was beyond furious. The dragon's secondary body had been revived with a large amount of magic energy from the main body. Due to the shared memories of the main body, he was now gnashing his teeth in anger at the holy samurai that he had a grudge with. Helmeter, who had risen into the air, looked around, trying his best to find the figure of this ant that had repeatedly brought him heavy injuries. Even if he skinned him, pulled out his tendons, and ground his bones to dust, it would not be enough to dispel the resentment in his heart. When he saw Johnson's figure enter the innermost defensive walls of the Bartholomew fortress, the demon lord's avatar immediately instigated the tyrant worm to once again launch an unstoppable attack. However, perhaps this demon lord did not look at the almanac before leaving today. When he rushed to the center of the Bartholomew fortress, the holy samurai had already jumped into the underground cave of the wartime medical camp. Just as Helmeter was about to urge the tyrant worm to burrow into the ground and launch a pursuit, a throwing object pierced through the air and struck the dragon's secondary body. Once bitten, twice shy. Helmeter had suffered a great loss several times in a day because he had underestimated his opponent. This time, it could be said that he was more careful. He did not wait for the throwing object to get close to him. He first cast a spell to firmly control it, then followed up with a disintegrate spell. With his excellent eyesight, he could vaguely see that the throwing object seemed to be in the shape of a pancake. There was something like a needle on one of the pancakes that spun counterclockwise. It was a simple timer. More accurately, it was some sort of timer trigger. The Goblin engineers had helped Paru design the per-potion diffusion equipment and created a large number of these timer triggers. The combination of the two allowed the potions that the witch doctor concocted to take effect at a certain point in time. The reason Keyes had to grit his teeth and wait for the signal that indicated that the per-potion diffusion equipment with this timer had been installed and tested, no matter how hard he fought. In the command room of the Bartholomew fortress, after confirming that the 3 ogre brothers and the 2 goblin golems had successfully teleported through the portal, the young human blue dragon heard 2 violent collisions. He looked towards the source of the sound and saw the tyrant worm that had broken into the core of the fortress. Without thinking, Quess used the prototype of the timer that he wanted to keep as a collection as a hidden weapon and threw it at the demon lord who was acting violently. Then, he passed through the portal without looking back. The guiding ingredients that Paru had used to concoct this batch of potions came from the remains of Tana Re that could be collected. The ogre voodoo doctor had divided the extract of the Baylor's demon lymph into several portions to produce better results. In the end, they were all added to the potion pools of over 20 evaporation equipment. Chapter 88. As the old saying goes, though the process is complicated, one must not neglect labor. Though the taste is expensive, one must not neglect material resources. It was the same for potions and poisons. The gift that the ogre witch doctor and the goblin engineer had prepared for the demon army that had invaded Fort Bator was indeed extraordinary. The green fog produced by the purling potion instantly shrouded the entire fort. Except for the tyrant worm, all the Tana Re demons that inhaled even a little of this fog were immediately affected. These guys more or less began the process of passive evolution. The higher-level demons were slightly better. Some of them had some abnormalities after a small part of their body failed to evolve. But the Tana Re demons like the Dretches were miserable. After their passive evolution failed, most of them would die due to the loss of too much life force. In just a dozen breaths, almost half of the demon army had died. The number of casualties was even more than the total number of casualties caused by all the mercenaries from the other planes. The tyrant worm was a demon lord, and naturally was not affected by the passive evolution induced by external factors. However, the sudden change in the army under its command still caused it to expend a large amount of spell energy to add advanced poison protection to its body. As the spellcaster of the demon lord, its dragon subbody was also benefited from this. Helmthal was in great confusion for a moment. As the main body of the tyrant worm, it might not pay attention to some common sense. But he was the incarnation of a demon lord created by the best spellcasters in the multiverse. Although he was not very knowledgeable, he still remembered the common sense that most Tana Re demons are immune to poison. Could it be that a poison that could cause mass destruction to the Tana Re demons had been developed? But if there was such a product, why didn't the demons of Batsu use it on the main battlefield like the Greyfield? Why did they leak the information about this weapon in such a small battle? And it seemed that not all the Tana Re demons were negatively affected. Under Helmthal's careful observation, he found that a large number of parasitic acid mist worms in the bodies of the Tana Re demons were not affected by the green poisonous fog. Instead, these worms became lively and lively. Some of the worms that had inhaled more of the green fog even devoured their hosts in a flash, completing the evolution of the scourge swarm that would have taken a longer time to achieve. Fortunately, there are still some gains this time. Helmthal comforted himself as he watched the new calamity bugs break out of their cocoons one after another. His anxious mood relaxed a little. However, this batch of calamity bugs was generally very weak, and only a few had reached the middle-rank demon level. Looking at the dispirited demons in the demon army, the dragon subbody was considering whether to let the newborn calamity bugs roam free and use them as nourishment. At this moment, Keys, who had just walked out of a portal in a large underground graveyard in the depths of the fungus forest, received a small metal box from the goblin engineer Riknaz. This device made of brass had a square shape, and its surface was slightly rough without any treatment. A line of neat small goblin words was engraved on the back of the device: Spanner Family Company Honorary Product. The young blue dragon lifted the lid of the small brass box and pressed the button inside without thinking. Why is there no reaction? After listening for a moment, Kith asked the goblin Riknaz, who was standing beside him calmly, in confusion. The great engineer replied with a smile, "Let the waves fly for a while longer." Before he even finished speaking, a massive explosion and violent tremors arrived at almost the same time. Art is an explosion. This was a phrase that originated from a certain bomb maniac. The previous commander of the Bator fortress had also said. However, Keyes had elaborated, the ultimate art is the ultimate explosion. Back in Avernus, when they were attacked by the demon vanguard, the barbed demon commander had only detonated the explosives stored in one of the defensive walls to annihilate almost all of the invaders. The young blue dragon was doing the same. However, he had filled every conceivable place in Bator fortress with explosives. With the double concealment of spells and the bone demon army, not a single defender of the fortress knew about it. His behavior could be described as deranged, but the effect could be described as shocking. As for the demons in the massive barrel of gunpowder that was the Bator fortress, who had the time to care about their feelings? The massive explosion had not only flattened all the buildings in the fortress, but it had even blown the tyrant worm's body out of the ground. This massive beast of unknown tonnage was thrown into the air before falling heavily to the ground. The Bator fortress had been reduced to a deep crater. The harvest that Helmut Tar had been so excited about, the newborn calamity worms, had been reduced to nothingness in the violent explosion, just like the rest of the Thanner demons. Not even a single strand of hair was left behind. If this demon lord had only suffered some minor injuries before, then it could definitely be said to be heavily injured now. The dragon's subbody was now a bloody mess. The giant worm's body was riddled with wounds of various sizes from the shockwaves of the explosion. Its fury was indescribable, but the tyrant worm, which had just recovered from its dizziness, was startled by the violent spell fluctuations coming from afar before it could do anything. At that moment, it had no time to treat its injuries and burrowed into the ground of the acid fog canyon. The Hell Gate, that had been prepared for a long time in Lich Snade's magic research laboratory, finally took shape. Thanks to sufficient preparation time and construction materials, the stone portico that was soaked in the flesh of the lowlifes was built to be extremely grand. The Hell Gate was more than 100 feet tall and was tightly attached to the top of the tomb. The giant door, which was enshrouded in a light blue magical radiance, was large enough to allow a dozen giants to pass through side by side. After the successful communication with the Avernus plane, a light blue mirror-like magical passage formed in the middle of the Hell Gate. A dragon head that looked like a giant skull poked out of the passage. It was an elderly black dragon. Being cautious by nature, it first cast a variety of magical defenses on itself, then continued to use its eyes that were enchanted with true sight to observe the people standing around it. Only then did it slowly move the rest of its body out of the Hell Gate. Suddenly, as if it was pushed by a huge force, the elderly black dragon stumbled and fell out of the portal's range. Dilly-dallying fellow, the young blue dragon who was standing not far away in his human form understood the dragon's reprimand. He saw a red dragon that was much larger than the previous black dragon striding out of the Hell Gate with its head held high. The other dragon that had been scolded by it earlier did not want to, dare not, argue with the red dragon. In a fit of anger, it flapped its wings and soared into the sky, breaking through the top of the tomb and rushing into the sky of the acid fog canyon. The elderly red dragon recognized Keyes' identity as a megalosaurus and said uneasily, "The coward has suddenly become a brainless idiot. Don't you think so, little one?" However, he did not wait for the young blue dragon's reply. Like the other dragon that had been scolded as an idiot, he also flew out of the top of the tomb. 1, 2, 3. All kinds of colorful megalosaurus walked out of the Hell Gate one after another. Driven by the Dragon Queen's will of conquest, they began the prelude of the plane conquest. Mechanical Golem number 21 used his finger to poke the terrifying armor standing beside him and said to the half-lich Snade who was hiding in it, "There's a big hole in the roof of your house. Shut up. Repair the roof, professional waterproof for 30 years. What's the price? It's free. Just a recommendation vote subscription. Chapter 89. As far as I know, there have been many examples of powerful mages summoning Megalosaurus to fight for them. Many of them are legendary champions like Kelvin Blackstaff, whose name has shaken the multiverse. According to the records of the Goblin Empire, these mages generally use a spell known as Dragon Oath. Some of the more outstanding ones can use Greater Dragon Oath. The number of Megalosaurus that respond to a summoning is often limited by the difficulty of the mission and the rewards offered by the caster. At most, it is difficult for the number to exceed single digit. But even so, these top-level curse-type spells were all crowned with the name of nation-destroying magic. Then, what is the name of the dragons that I saw in the acid fog canyon plain, covering the sky and covering the sun? Report of the Bloody Battle of Reichenaz, Arbus Volume 25. Following the operation of Hellgate Fortress, more than 200 Megalosaurus of the Pentashade arrived in the acid fog canyon of the bottomless abyss. 3/4 of them were the backbone of the species in their prime, while the rest were older and more powerful dragons and a few extremely old ones. A pair of fraternal twin ancient red dragon brothers were the current leaders of the dragons. They each led half of the Megalosaurus to other places to reinforce the Bot-Or expeditionary force that had yet to open Hellgate Fortress. Apart from that, there were also a large number of abyssal dragon demons and other Batsu devils that followed closely behind the dragon. They had successfully arrived through the portal. Ever since Keyes had finished communicating with Avernus in Hellgate Fortress, the other side had completely taken over the task of supplying magic. Hellgate Fortress was like a water pipe that had been turned on. The military forces of the 9 prisons of Bader were continuously channeled to the acid fog canyon. The well-trained legion of devils immediately took over the defense of Hellgate Fortress. Large numbers of lowly demons were dismembered by these cruel and efficient executioners, turning into flesh and blood sacrifices to fight against the chaotic laws of the bottomless abyss. The demons and imps summoned by the Batsu summon ability were all whipped by the senior-rank demons to build new defensive fortresses from scratch. As the first commander of the expeditionary force to open Hell's Gate Fortress, and with his identity as a Megalosaurus, the evil Dragon Council, and that strangely long and difficult-to-remember name of the devil bureaucracy immediately issued a notice of commendation to Keyes. In fact, the young blue dragon had even obtained the special privilege of retreating from the bloody battlefield in advance and returning to his original world to recuperate through the Bateau wartime recuperation regulations and the elite Pentashade dragon seedling cultivation plan. He's really better at writing than some web novel authors, Keyes couldn't help but secretly complain as he held the letter of commendation that was nearly 10,000 words long. However, he still had a grateful expression on his face as he spoke respectfully to the emissaries in front of him. "Thank you for gracing me with your presence, sirs. Please forgive me if I'm lacking in hospitality." Unlike the rewards given after killing the Baylor, there were 2 emissaries this time. They represented the Evil Dragon Council and the Strategic Attack and Logistics Bureau of Bateau's first layer of territory. One of them was someone Keyes was familiar with, the Chunibu Red Dragon Kryphia. The other was a pit fiend that represented the strongest fighting force of the Batsu race. Unlike the Great Devil who had been pretending to be cold and silent, this third-generation god was surprised to see Keyes again so soon. She circled around Keyes 3 times in his human form before speaking. "You're quite capable, dragon. You actually managed to survive the attack of the tyrant worm. Although the strength of those dactyls isn't worth mentioning, there's still a demon lord. I was just lucky. It's all thanks to your care and the guidance of the great will of the Dragon Queen. Modesty was the traditional virtue of the Chinese. Besides, what if he said something wrong and the Red Dragon insisted on having a competition? What should he do?" Keyes did not have the habit of "I'd rather die if I didn't cause trouble." Right now, he only wanted to quietly receive the rewards that he deserved, and then bring his friends back from this bloody battlefield to his familiar dragon nest to develop wretchedly. He felt more and more that ever since he got involved in the blood war, he had been getting closer to a certain death student. Wherever he went, things would happen. The old dragon Sirota had found someone to help him get into a safe and remote camp, but he'd met two Bailers in Avernus. It hadn't been easy for them to gang up and kill the two Bailers, but the higher-ups had arranged for them to be airdropped. Just now, he'd relied on spending money in the Acid Fog Canyon to get rid of two batches of airdrops, which had directly provoked a demon lord. If he didn't retreat quickly, what kind of enemy would appear in front of him next? A demon prince or an evil god of the abyss? No matter what it was an existence Keys couldn't afford to offend. Even if his strength and size far exceeded his peers, he was still a child. Former commander of the expeditionary forces, the first layer of Bator. Strategy. Logistics. Anyway, it's the authorities. In order to commend your achievements, I've decided to reward you with a silver-bladed weapon bestowed upon you by the current queen of Githyanki. The pit fiend, who had always been cold and callous, had the heavy responsibility of being the temporary commander of Batsu's army. When he saw that Kryphia was about to say something, he took the initiative to speak first. He then took out a small sword case made of bronze from his spatial equipment, passing it to Keys before continuing, "All you have to do is imprint your secret imprint on the formation of this sword case, and it'll open safely." After finishing his explanation, the pit fiend didn't wait for the young blue dragon to express his gratitude before using a high-grade teleportation spell to leave. The Githyanki were a type of Githyanki. They were different from their close relatives, the Githzilai. Almost all Githyanki were fighters through and through. After overthrowing the spirit-sucking empire together, the two went their separate ways and developed a culture of mutual contempt. In the great revenge of overthrowing the spirit-sucking empire, the Githyanki queen paid an unknown price to reach an agreement with the evil dragon goddess Tiamat. The dragon queen sent one of her vassals and consorts, the red dragon Ephilemon, to the astral plane to assist in the war. Since then, the Githyanki had formed an alliance with the red dragon, and had a tradition of plundering the astral plane together. As for the silver-bladed weapon, it was a special weapon the Githyanki had created to fight against their spirit-sucking masters. This weapon could guide the user's will and origin force, causing both physical and mental damage. Only the Githyanki who had gone through the necessary special training had the ability to maintain the sharpness of the silver-bladed weapon with their will. Only then would they be crowned as Githyanki Knight. In the eyes of every Githyanki, every silver-bladed weapon was a symbol of their race's glory, a priceless work of art. The Githyanki Knights would drive starships or magic ships to capture and destroy any non-Githyanki who dared to carry or use a silver-bladed weapon, unless the silver-bladed weapon was given as a gift by the previous Githyanki Empress or the current undead Queen Varakis. "Don't worry, I have a silver-bladed weapon like this too. My father gave me one when I was young, and it's the same as yours. It was given by the previous Githyanki Empress herself. Although there aren't many of them, there are still plenty of silver-bladed weapons in Bator." The red dragon Kryphia kindly reminded when she saw Keys holding the silver-bladed sword box like he had never seen the world. He didn't know whether to open it or not. Note 1. Githyanki means, followers of Githyanki in its own language. Under the guidance of Githyanki, the Githyanki not only overthrew the tyranny of spirit-sucking masters and concluded an alliance with the Red Dragon race, but they also established a militarized social form and introduced the caste system. After the death of Githyanki, her undead advisor, Vlakith, replaced her position. In order to distinguish her from the title Githyanki Empress, she will be called the Undead Queen, Lich Queen. Chapter 90. Batsu and the others are really stingy. Even the old dragons of the Evil Dragon Council are more generous than them, Kryphia glanced in the direction where the pit fiend had left and said nonchalantly, "The evil dragon council has 2 rewards this time. The first is a drop of divine blood from the great dragon empress. As long as you assimilate it into your body, you'll be able to surpass the shackles of your age and race, and become closer to the ancient pentashade megalosaurus. The second is more dependent on luck. I brought a scale from an ancient dragon that has been confirmed dead. The old fellows of the Evil Dragon Council have already checked it many times, and there's no trace of its consciousness. If you carry it with you for a long time, there's a small chance that you'll gain some abilities belonging to the megalosaurus. I personally suggest—" "I'll take both," Keys blurted out. "Only children could choose. Of course, an adult would want both." Besides, the young blue dragon was still intelligent. He knew that the 2 items Kryphia had brought were not just rewards, but also a test. There had been more than one pentashade megalosaurus in the multiverse that dared to face the evil dragon god head-on. These unworthy descendants all had one thing in common: they were severely overweight from a very young age. Any pentashade dragon that belonged to this different species would, without exception, refuse to convert to the Dragon Empress path of faith. The first reward, Tiamat's blood essence, was a test for Keys. If he refused to choose the dragon god's blood essence, and only chose the second reward related to the megalosaurus, then what awaited him would not be returning to his dragon lair to develop in glory. Instead, it would be all sorts of open and covert attacks aimed at killing him. However, one should not forget that Tiamat's divine domain also included the domain of conspiracy. It was hard not to guess that choosing the first reward was just a cover-up. Only by choosing both would a pentashade megalosaurus be in line with its greedy nature. Only then would he be able to pass this test. "Oh, it's not impossible for you to take both. In view of your contributions, the old fellows of the Evil Dragon Council said that it's acceptable." Kryphia thought for a moment. Indeed, she had been told that if this young blue dragon chose both, it would be a consideration for his age, and she would agree. After sending off the Chunibu red dragon, Kryphia, once again, Keys began to inspect his final gains from this bloody battle. At this time, he had once again transformed into his megalosaurus form. The bruises and pains that were inevitably left from the previous battle could be healed faster in this form. After the Batsu Devil's regular army took over the defense of Hell's Gate Fortress, the mercenary army that originally belonged to Keys was demoted to a reserve force. After communicating with the 9 prisons of Bader, the Devils no longer lacked cannon fodder. The main task of the foreign mercenaries was to serve as the young blue dragon's retinue. The cave that the young blue dragon was resting in was dug out by these people under the command of Ogre Brew. Keys first took out the bronze sword case that contained the Githyanki silver blade. After verifying his unique secret mark, he opened the case and picked up the weapon to examine it. The silver blade could change as the user's psionic control improved. The silver blade in the scabbard looked like a standard weapon, but once it was pulled out in battle, this sharp sword would transform into a stream of silver liquid. In the hands of an outstanding Githyanki knight, this weapon could even transform into a giant sword in an instant. Its characteristic of being as light as a feather and as hard as adamantine would make any enemy who faced it fearful. However, although the young blue dragon had the gift of psionic power, most megalosaurus were versatile. It was not good at controlling this kind of power that extended from its own will. The silver blade in its hand could only maintain the appearance of a small dishwasher. After thinking for a while, he did not have a good solution for the time being. He could only find an opportunity to learn some knowledge about psionic power before he could make a decision. Putting down the silver blade, Keys picked up the dragon god's blood essence that was rewarded by the Evil Dragon Council. A drop of blood that contained a dark golden radiance was wrapped in a prismatic crystal. As long as the outer wall of the crystal was broken, this drop of blood essence would automatically be absorbed by the nearest megalosaurus. In fact, when he received this big gift, he was prepared to put it aside. What if there was something like a mind demon seed in it? Moreover, the gift of the evil god might be worse than a mind demon seed. In the end, the young blue dragon simply put it and the silver blade in the sword box and locked it aside for other uses. After thinking about it, he still chose the last reward, the dragon scale of the ancient power dragon. It had an immediate effect on the growth of his current strength. If the white dragon was the shame of the dragon species, then the three legendary dragon species, Power Dragon, Rainbow Dragon, and Time Dragon, were the envy of all Megalosaurus. What was a legendary dragon species? Ordinary Megalosaurus, even if it was the red dragon of the pentashade dragons and the gold dragon of the metal dragons, only a small number of the best of them could become legendary after a few hundred years of continuous effort. However, Megalosaurus of the other three species would naturally possess strength that many Megalosaurus could not reach in their lifetime after being born. Among them, the Time Dragon with the most shocking talent was not only born immortal, but as long as it grew to the level of an ancient dragon, it would automatically possess the special ability of time deification. An intricate link was formed between the Time Dragon and the flow of time. It could almost move back and forth in the flow of time at will. This was something that most gods with great divine power could not do. Although the Power Dragon was not as good as the Time Dragon, and it was almost impossible to find the remains of a dead Time Dragon, the value of this legendary Megalosaurus that had grown to the level of an ancient dragon was also immeasurable. The evil Dragon Council and the Dragon Queen were willing to reward Keys, but the biggest possibility was that they had found that this material could not be used after thousands of studies. In their hands, this scale was equivalent to a decoration of a piece of art. However, Keys was the main character of this novel after all. He was the young blue dragon who had the golden finger given by the author. The effect of the passive evolution ability of self-adaptation had already been revealed when he fused with the ancient golden dragon's heart. As the Power Dragon's scale grew older, it would gradually change from the shimmering diamond appearance when it was young to a less dazzling transparent crystal appearance. Its ability to deflect light allowed the Power Dragon to always be under a strange effect similar to the haze spell and the greater invisibility spell. In addition, the Power Dragon naturally did not have any smell. Even if the opponent had the vision of truth, it would be difficult to locate this pure power creature. Keys swallowed this transparent crystal scale that was the size of a door into his mouth. At first, he wanted to chew on it, but he gave up the idea after just a light bite. Its hardness was really amazing. Even the young blue dragon's teeth that could crush metal or could not leave a mark on it. In desperation, Quest had no choice but to swallow it down. Fortunately, with his size, this scale would not be stuck in his esophagus. Sure enough, it was just as he had expected. As soon as this scale was swallowed, the passive evolution ability of self-adaptation that he had obtained from the Amaska Ancient Civilization Laboratory before he hatched from his shell took effect. The power of the Golden Dragon and the Blue Dragon's bloodline in his body suddenly exploded after the third bloodline mixed in. Keys felt as if his internal organs had been turned upside down. Just like last time, the fusion this time was accompanied by intense pain. However, unlike last time, the pain this time was much more intense. As a natural force field creature, the Power Dragon itself existed in the form of a force field. Its body itself was a mass of condensed force field. When the young blue dragon began to adapt to this creature's ability, he could clearly feel the existence of the force that twisted every molecule and every atom in his body. First, it was his internal organs, then his limbs and bones. Finally, even the force field in his brain was clearly reflected in his consciousness. It felt as if every part of his body was crushed under a hydraulic press, and the part of his brain seemed to be taken care of. After clenching his teeth for a while, Keys could not hold on anymore and fainted. After he fell into a coma, the disorderly force field energy gushed out. The cave where he lived was the first to bear the brunt and suddenly collapsed under the continuous force field bombardment. Beside the young blue dragon, the bronze sword box containing the silver blade and Tiamat's blood essence was also torn into pieces by the overflowing force field energy. After the crystal wrapped in the divine blood shattered, the blood droplets in it, under the guidance of the dragon god's will, instinctively flew to Keys, who was closest to it and was in the process of passive evolution. But who knew that it would be intercepted by the silver blade placed next to him? To be more precise, it should be captured by the crystal inlaid on the hilt of the silver blade. This thing was left behind by the spirit-sucking monster killed by the probationary knight in the trial of the Githyanki knight. Under the effect of the Githyanki psionic secret technique, the killed spirit-sucking monster would be condensed into a crystal similar to the spirit crystal servant and inlaid on the silver blade. This crystal could increase the spiritual appearance of the silver blade's wielder and reduce the psionic energy consumption when using the silver blade. However, what the crystalline object was doing right now was extremely bizarre, even in the multiverse where gods and demons were everywhere. The crystal left behind by the spirit-sucking monster transformed by the Githyanki knight in preparation using a secret technique could not still have self-consciousness. Without its controller, the silver blade, logically speaking, could not move on its own to capture the dragon god's blood essence. As the famous detective Sherlock Holmes said, the problem can only be solved through research. If you want to solve the problem by relying only on perception, you will fail in the end. However, Keys lost consciousness due to the great pain caused by the passive evolution. At this time, the young blue dragon could not even perceive the strange changes caused by the crystal on the silver blade after absorbing the dragon god's blood essence, let alone study this phenomenon. As if there were no obstacles, the drop of Tiamat's blood essence soaked into the depths of the crystal inlaid on the hilt of the silver blade as soon as it came in contact with it. The brilliance with the breath of divinity burst out from the inside of the crystal, but it was deeply buried by the collapsed soil of the cave. Only a little light could be seen from the gaps in the soil. As for what changes had occurred inside, no one knew at this moment. Note 1. The time dragon breathes time, swallows time, it is time itself. If one wanted to kill this legendary megalosaurus that was as high as level 21 when it was a fledgling, the most likely situation was to encounter one or more murder targets from a certain time point in the future before this idea was executed. Note 2. The spirit crystal servant can be roughly understood as the psionicist version of the mage's construct pet. The crystal here refers to the deep crystal setting in the expansion manual. Chapter 91. The word tradition is endowed with a different color in the language of any living being. Even Strachan, an evil neighbor who believed in the path of chaos, would show a solemn and dignified power when he mentioned the word tradition. As a Gith, not a Githyanki, nor a Githzeli, what kind of tradition should I follow as a Gith? The history of the birth of my race is well known to the world. The slaves captured by the psionic tyrants and slave traders and brought into the astral world to live. After several generations of reproduction, they eventually evolved into Gith with psionic talent and more adapted to life in the astral world. The Gith Empress was a great hero who led her people to the road of freedom, and my race was named after her. But another hero who also shone in the resistance that symbolized the birth of the Gith people, Zephyr Moan, did not agree with the development path that the Empress chose for my race. It was similar to the path practiced by the spirit-sucking monsters who enslaved the Gith people before. The words Githyanki and Githzeli were like a gap, separating the original Gith people. Just because of the differences in their own future path, the natural bonds of family, friends, partners, and father and son were shattered. From the beginning of my birth as a Githyanki, I was instilled with the hatred of Githzeli, a close relative who lived in the Chaos Sea. But fortunately, with the help of the spirit-sucking monster, The Gith people could not replace this monster at the top of the list of Gith people's hatred. My coming-of-age ceremony was to hunt a spirit-sucking monster alone and advance to a Gith Yankee knight who was qualified to hold a silver blade. But it was also this operation that made me completely doubt the tradition of the Gith people. I, who had been training for more than 10 years for that hunt, should have easily inserted the weapon in my hand into the octopus-like face of the spirit-sucking monster without any delay. But who would have thought that my prey was not an ordinary spirit-sucking monster, but an arcanist with an extremely exquisite spell-casting ability? At that time, the hunting operation lacked a plan to deal with such a situation. As soon as I made my move, the situation was reversed, and I was almost unable to put up any effective resistance. At that time, as a reserve knight, I became a captive. Due to the racial talent of the Gith people, I didn't become a muddle-headed servant who could only listen to the orders of the master. This sobriety brought me even greater humiliation. My freedom was restricted by those strange monsters using magic, and I could only helplessly wait to become their snack or be forcefully transformed into a heartless slave. Those were the few times in my life when I was truly filled with fear. The one who rescued me from the abyss of fear was a monk named Zeth, who was carrying out the mission of the church. He was Master Monk Giselai. He came from the monastery in the Chaos Sea and cleanly dealt with the enemy that I couldn't deal with. As a prisoner, I happened to witness the attack, and as a result, I began to doubt the traditional Githyanki education about the feebleness and cowardice of these close relatives. Later, when I recalled my thoughts at that time, I often felt ashamed. How superficial the value of external things to measure the superiority and inferiority of individuals and even races was. As an object, the heart is the slave of form. Only by seeing the heart and seeing the nature, and seeing the emptiness of the 5 skandhas, can one achieve self-sufficiency inside and outside. This was the first lesson taught to me by the teacher who taught me the way of Zasamoan. He was the one who killed the spirit-sucking monster Arcanist and freed me, who was imprisoned, from Zeth. My ability to accept new things had always made me quite proud. It was the same during the days when I followed my teacher in the Chaos Sea to learn to use the mind to control order. I could always accurately understand every word of the Githyanki psionic master's teachings. But this also made me feel more and more confused. Every time I used my psionic ability, I couldn't help but think of the traditional education I received in the training before I became a Githyanki knight. Holding the silver blade in my hand, this weapon didn't refuse me to use it. Feeling the psionic power in my heart, I also benefited a lot from the Githyanki's philosophy. This was not because of my talent. In fact, other than learning fast, I didn't even have any talent that I could show. Every time I thought of this, I became more and more convinced that the unity of the two in me was a microcosm. The Githyanki and the Githyanki were the same race. It was just that we both chose to accept our own narrow traditions, so there was a gap between us. When I told my teacher my point of view, he laughed heartily with relief. At that moment, he seemed to have become a naughty child. Later, I learned that he held the same point of view a long time ago. It was because of this that he taught me all his knowledge after saving me from the spirit-sucking monster Arcanist. Even now, I still clearly remember the words my teacher said after he laughed unrestrainedly that day. "If you are not alone, you will have neighbors. My path is not alone. Since thou knowest it, thou shalt practice it." It was also from that day onwards that my life was given a new meaning, to sweep away the foolish traditions and let the Githyanki be united again. I bid farewell to my teacher from the monastery in the Chaos Sea and began to practice the path in my heart. During the days of wandering in the astral world, I began to try to persuade every Githyanki and Githyanki I met with words, to persuade them to believe in what I believed in, but the result was very little. With the silver blade in my hand, most of the Githyanki would respect me as the Knight of Githyanki, With the magical psionic power, most of the Githyanki would also respectfully call me monk scythe of a different race. But for the path I believed in, most of the time, they would smile and treat it as nonsense, and a few grumpy ones would even sneer at me in my face. Of course, I would not be discouraged. My teacher's teaching once again played a role. The losers always changed their goals, but they insisted on one method. The winners always changed their methods, but they insisted on one goal. So I thought of a brand new method. If successful, I would be able to achieve my goal once and for all. Order and chaos are the basic rules of the multiverse, and everything is the embodiment of these two rules. The division of the Githyanki was the representation of chaos, and the path I believed in was a correction of order for chaos. As for how to use order to correct chaos, I had thought of challenging the current leader of the Githyanki, the undead Empress Varakis. But I gave up the idea the moment I boarded her starship. It was not out of cowardice. It was just that I suddenly thought that even if I killed the Empress, not to mention whether this action would arouse greater indignation of the Githyanki and cause more hatred of the Githyanki compatriots, even if I sat on her throne and could make all the Githyankis practice the path I believed in, how could the tradition of the Githyanki be broken? Order of the same level couldn't correct chaos of the same level, only a higher level of order was possible. This epiphany made me put away the idea of using swords to persuade, and I began to look for a higher level of order. Fortunately, the creatures that survived in the astral world did not have to worry about aging and death, and I searched for nearly 1,000 years. Although the process was tortuous and complicated, in the end, I found what I wanted. There was often an extreme order in extreme chaos, and the higher level of order I was looking for was the same. It was hidden in the pure chaos of the multiverse, the Chaos Sea. A long time ago, the singularity of the dominator of the mechanical realm, Demon Fall, who believed in the path of absolute order, created a boulder with a complex geometric shape, and injected the power of order into it and threw it into the Chaos Sea. That existence believed that this boulder, which could absorb energy and grow on its own, could effectively contain and prevent the Chaos Sea from spreading the violent power of chaos to other planes. In this regard, he did succeed, and it was precisely because of the existence of the Singularity Stone that my Githyanki compatriots could reproduce in the Chaos Sea. But what the Singularity Dominator did not expect was that his creation had a huge side effect after absorbing a large amount of power of chaos. The extremely rich power of chaos on the surface of the Singularity Stone gave birth to a terrifying monster called the Strachan. This creature with a shocking reproduction method and an ugly appearance was not only a great enemy of the Githyanki, who also lived in the Chaos Sea, but also a serious obstacle in my path of finding a higher level of order. In their language, the Singularity Stone should be called the Spawning Stone. The Spawning Stone's magic waves would cause a gem the size of a human child's fist to grow in the brain of every primordial Strachan. This gem was called the Heart of the Strachan. Even if the Strachan was not born from the Spawning Stone, as long as it came into contact with the Spawning Stone, it would use this as an opportunity to form a new heart of the Strachan in its brain. Other creatures could summon the heart of the Strachan through magic and use this method to subdue the Strachan. A heart of the Strachan could control a Strachan. If someone controlled the Singularity Stone, even if it was just a small piece, it would probably have a serious impact on their race. Therefore, every creature that tried to get close to the Singularity Stone would be besieged by all the Strachan. Even someone as noble as a god would be treated like this, let alone someone like me who's just a Gith. However, as everyone who practiced the path of psionic energy knew, with the support of absolute conviction, the power of psionic energy would become invincible. When a person worked unswervingly for a goal, the whole world would make way for him. After killing countless Strachan, I finally succeeded in cutting a small piece of the Singularity Stone with a silver blade, and then Keyes had just recovered a trace of consciousness from the passive evolution when he was surprised to find that there was such a voice in his head telling him something. He, who was originally very frightened, wanted to concentrate on driving away this uninvited guest from his consciousness. However, after trying hundreds of times, the young blue dragon was like a ghost pressing down on the bed. He wanted to, but he was powerless. Later on, perhaps because he loved to listen to storytelling when he was a child in his previous life, Keyes slowly immersed himself in the magnificent scene described by this voice. The experience of being tortured by "please listen to the next breakdown" made him involuntarily ask this question to the voice that could be called a Gith sage. The voice of the Gith sage paused for a moment before replying, "Look at me now, you naturally know that I failed. Although I found a higher level of order, I couldn't stimulate the ultimate order contained in the singularity stone fragment that was cut off. The psionic power that once allowed me to roam the astral world, kill all my enemies, and defeat all my heroes was unable to withstand it. In addition, in order to cut this fragment, I inevitably came into contact with the extremely rich chaotic power on the surface of the boulder. As a mortal, I quickly walked towards death, and in the end, I had to return to my hometown with shattered hopes and dreams to be buried by my clansmen. And just now, the singularity stone fragment on your silver blade happened to sense the blood essence from the dragon god, so it automatically absorbed it and unlocked some of the law seals, allowing your obsession to reappear." Keyes, who was aroused by curiosity, did not notice that he was turning into some Dayun girls who were used to chatting, and asked, "Maybe, but I don't know if there are still people who practice the path I believe in after I die?" Keyes did not have an accurate answer to this question, and he did not want to tell the cruel guess in his heart to the Gith sage who spent his life pursuing his ideals. "It doesn't matter, I already know the answer from your hesitation. It's just that I can already feel that the power of the Singularity Stone is declining. I want to ask you if you agree with my belief that there is only one kind of Gith." In the face of the last words of such a respectable person, Keyes naturally did not want to let him die with disappointment, so the young blue dragon replied in a deep voice in his consciousness, "Through your description and the knowledge I have, I am willing to believe this point of view you put forward. And if someone asks me this question in the future, I will use your words as an answer." After the young blue dragon answered this sentence, the silver blade inlaid with the singularity stone fragment on the outside of his body, which could not be seen at the moment, suddenly released a dazzling light. This sharp sword turned into a mercury-like rainbow, penetrating the barrier of gravel and soil that covered it, and went straight into Keyes's dragon body. The chaotic force field that dissipated on the surface of his body after he swallowed the primordial energy dragon's scale and entered the passive evolution process was torn open by this brilliance cast by the purest belief. In Keyes's sea of consciousness, a large amount of knowledge about the use of psionic energy and the manipulation of silver weapons was instantly poured into him. The young blue dragon could feel that the huge and mixed mind that originally belonged to the Megalosaurus was gradually compressed and condensed as if it was being clenched by a firm and powerful giant hand. "If one is not alone, one must have a neighbor. My path is not alone." This was the last sentence Keyes heard in his consciousness. Chapter 92. Quessa's adaptive, passive evolution process had finally come to an end. Unlike the originally estimated time of a few days or at most 10 days, the entire process lasted for nearly 2 years. During this period of time, the 3 ogre brothers immediately brought the mercenaries from the other plane to open up a tunnel in the collapsed cave. When they found the young blue dragon who was constantly surrounded by violence, it was definitely inappropriate to call the giant dragon in front of them that way. Ketha's body size had once again rebounded after he successfully lost weight by fusing with the ancient golden dragon's heart. Surprisingly, unlike other Megalosaurus that grew in size due to age, Keyes' body did not show signs of muscle loss. He did not become skinny due to not eating for a long time. After 2 years of passive evolution, the young blue dragon became even more plump and muscular. After Keys obtained the legacy of psionic powers branded in the silver blade, he would use his simple consciousness to guide the psionic energy and try to control the rampaging force field in his body. His method of operation was simple. Following the principle of Newton's third law, force is reciprocal, Keys used the psionic energy to add a little force to the various unbalanced positions in his body every day. Over time, dripping water could penetrate a stone. As the chaotic force field in his body gradually stabilized, Quess absorbed and adapted to the characteristics of a pure force field creature like the power dragon. The power that he added to his body with psionic energy every day was perfectly converted into a part of him. Therefore, even though he did not eat or drink for almost 2 years, his body did not become weak. Instead, it entered a state of continuous strengthening. As Key's body size increased, Ogre Brew had no choice but to specially invite the goblin engineer Riknaz to be the chief designer. He specially arranged for a large group of mercenaries from the other plane to open up a cave for the young blue dragon to live in. Fortunately, Keys was now able to effectively control the chaotic force field overflowing from his body. As long as he didn't get too close to it, there wouldn't be any danger. The situation of directly causing the original cave to collapse like in the beginning had never happened again. Finally, the young blue dragon opened his eyes when the overflowing force field was completely contained within his body. At this time, Keys's body had completely let go of itself. Like a doe, he had expanded to a size that even a blue dragon in his prime could not reach. The surface of the originally indigo scales was covered in a layer of hazy radiance, as if they were sprinkled with a layer of broken diamonds. The dark golden veins between the scales seemed to be covered with a layer of varnish. Only when Keys moved his body would it inadvertently reveal a ray of light. The power dragon was born with the ability to control force fields, which allowed it to have the most perfect physique among all the megalosaurus. The young blue dragon seemed to have inherited this trait. His originally well-built body was now even more muscular. At first glance, the powerful physical strength seemed to be on the verge of erupting at any time. The more peculiar change was Keys's posture at this time. He didn't use any levitation spells, nor did he shake his wings. Just by using the force field naturally emitted from his body, the young blue dragon's heavy dragon body naturally floated above the ground, floating in the air. At this time, Keys's eyelids were still attached with a layer of gray force field shield, but it didn't affect his keen vision at all. He stared at his right forelimb, and the silver blade that had been completely integrated into his body popped out from the sharp claws in an instant. Under the blessing of the psionic ability, the weapon transformed into a giant sword that swallowed and spat out silver light. However, with the young blue dragon's body at this time, the giant sword was just like a dagger to his dragon claws. Thanks to the teaching of the Gith sage in the silver blade, the skill of using the silver blade seemed to have become a kind of instinct for Keys. Gently drawing across the ground, in the middle of the 5 dragon claw marks, the dagger plowed deeper into the soil without any sluggishness. The news of the young blue dragon's awakening had already been reported by the mercenaries stationed here to their ogre commander. Not long after, the 3 brothers, Neru, Palu, and Buru, as well as the 2 goblin golems, hurried over. As Keys had inherited most of the immemorial dragon's abilities, he was far more sensitive to force field ripples than ordinary people. He had long since discovered that every creature would produce different force field ripples due to their own reasons. This sense wasn't obtained through sight, but rather through a kind of intuition. This kind of sensory ability was hard to describe, but when he saw the 3 ogre brothers, Keys acutely felt that Neru's body had grown a little. This wasn't something that could be done overnight. "Oh, how long have I been here?" the young blue dragon asked hesitantly. He checked his body and found that there wasn't much dust on it. What he didn't know was that due to the force field on the surface of his body, even dust would be blown away if it touched his skin. There was no problem with it at all. 735 days. My gourmet cooking guide has recorded 245 new adjustments to the recipe. Ogre Gourmet Blue patted the gourmet box that he carried with him. The Ogre's Gourmet Cooking Guide was inside. That's right. I've also performed 147 system upgrades, one every 5 days. The records are all saved in the data update log. Golem number 21 also used his finger to flick his head, not wanting to be outdone by his mathematical abilities. However, his good friend the Goblin Engineer knew that this guy's head didn't have any recording equipment installed. Instead, there were some parts in his body that he didn't understand that might have recording and storage functions. Of course, the Goblin Engineer wouldn't expose his good friend. After a series of force fields, Keys returned to his human youth form. He ran out of the cave, leaving a trail of dust behind him. Let's go. I hope the Bator recuperation rule hasn't expired yet. However, when he turned around, he found that everyone was just standing there, looking at him awkwardly. Close. Keys read the word out from the mouth of the ogre shaman Palu. Golem number 21's eyes suddenly flashed. In the end, under the young blue dragon's coercion and the price of a copy of the Nine-Sword Catalog, Golem number 21 finally promised to format all the information in the database from a few minutes ago. Due to the smooth progress of the operation in the Acid Fog Canyon, the Pit Fiend commander in charge of the area temporarily didn't assign too many cannon fodder missions to the mercenaries from the other planes. As the young blue dragon's retainers, apart from taking turns to expand Key's Cave, they'd basically spent almost 2 years resting. Most of them were villains from all corners of the multiverse, and they displayed great adaptability. In a corner of the Batsu Devil's camp, they'd forcibly built a small town out of nothing. Apart from the brothels and gambling dens, the most popular place of entertainment in this spontaneously formed town was the True Fragrance Tavern, founded by Blue the Ogre. As a gourmet, the clever ogre had used some unique ingredients in the abyss to brew many different types of strong alcohol. To Blue, earning money wasn't the most important thing. The most important thing was that his craftsmanship was acknowledged by others, and that made him very happy. However, to the mercenaries from the other planes who lived on the edge of their blades, this tavern could always produce new warrior friends. It wasn't as simple as just enjoying the taste of their mouth. Try the new wine. Drink a cup of viper's blood. If you don't die from the poison within 30 breaths, you've passed. One is a serene, the other an ordinary human. Who do you think will win? Place your bets quickly. Place your bets quickly. However, not everyone had the same resistance to poison as the 3 ogre brothers. Although the wine brewed by Blue using abyss ingredients had been processed, Nalu and Paru were fine after tasting it. However, it was different for others. Some strong alcohol with poison wasn't something that everyone could taste. It was because of this that the True Fragrance Tavern had people who used tasting as a gimmick to gamble every day. The tavern's bartender was a bone devil. As a Batsu devil, he naturally didn't have any ill feelings towards evil. In fact, watching these mortals risk their lives to taste the poisoned wine for a few calamity coins had become his greatest source of entertainment. After all, because he couldn't fight on the battlefield, he had lost the opportunity to bully other low-level devils. Without such entertainment to supplement his mood, he would probably slowly go crazy. After the enthusiastic Batsu bartender handed over 2 cups of viper's blood, he used his spell-like ability to specially add some crushed ice. Then, he calmly watched the mortal's death-seeking challenge. There were 2 people tasting the wine. One was a serene with the body of a deerhead, and the other was an ordinary human wearing gray clothes. Most of the participants in this gamble placed their bets on the former. After all, the Seronians had survived several tastings in a row. This had already verified his boast that the Seronians had a special liking for poisonous plants. On the other hand, most of the regular customers of the tavern could recognize the ordinary human who participated in this gamble. For more than a year, he had been drinking here like a drunkard every day. Only when his wallet was empty would he go to the camp to pick up garbage to earn a meager income, or directly exchange his pay for wine in the tavern. This was the first time he participated in the drinking gamble. It was probably because there was no garbage to pick up during this period of time, or because there were too many people in the tavern who exchanged their pay for work, so he had no choice but to participate in the drinking gamble. 2 cups of iced viper's blood were drunk in one gulp by the 2 participants. Some busybodies started counting, 1, 2, 3. But something unexpected happened. The defending champion didn't even last half the time before collapsing to the ground, foaming at the mouth and losing consciousness. The sloppy drunkard, on the other hand, just coughed a few times due to the ice in his throat and quietly waited until the time was up. A new powerful taster has been born. Let us cheer for him. After the noise, the organizer of the drinking gamble threw a small bag to the human who was still sitting in the same place. 10 calamity coins, count them. The man took the bag and carefully counted the coins after opening it. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.